All right, in essence of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, Subcommittee on Energy, Climate, and Grid Security will now come to order. Chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. First off, I apologize for being a few minutes late. I want to thank you to the 5 commissioners for appearing before the Energy, Climate, and Grid Security Subcommittee today to discuss the recent activities of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Chairman Phillips, Commissioner Christie, welcome back. It's good to have you. Commissioners Rosner, S, and Chang, congratulations on your recent confirmations, and we're glad you're here today as well. Chairman Phillips, I'd like to take a moment to commend you for your efforts to clear some of the backlog of major natural gas pipeline projects, as well as your recent vote in support of U.S. LNG exports. And I'm glad you got your wife back from overseas, and we were happy to accommodate that. So America is blessed with significant natural resources, and FERC plays a key role in dictating the trajectory of our energy economy. Despite our abundance of fossil fuel, nuclear, and renewable energy resources, consumers have been hammered by soaring energy costs, particularly electricity. The latest inflation data from June shows that electricity price inflation exceeds the consumer price index by 47%. And electricity rates have increased by approximately 20% since President Biden took office. FERC's mission is to, and I quote, assist consumers in obtaining reliable, safe, secure, and economically efficient energy services at a reasonable cost through appropriate regulatory and market means and collaborative efforts. Despite the positive steps forward on natural gas pipelines and LNG facilities, we're concerned that the Commission is failing to adhere to this mission in other aspects. No portion of FERC's mission lends itself to being an environmental regulator. Yet we are concerned the Commission has strayed from its responsibility as an economic regulator to an entity focused on assisting the build-out of so-called green energy technologies. This is happening despite the continued alarms from the North American Electric Reliability Corporation and other grid operators across the country. NERC's 2024 Summer Reliability Assessment highlighted 5 regions of the country that are at risk of insufficient operating reserves and above normal weather conditions. Grid operators around the nation are sounding the alarm. FERC's recent Order 1920 on regional transmission planning and cost allocation, which Energy and Commerce Republicans have opposed, will drive up cost and make the grid less reliable. Now, I understand we'll hear from a different opinion from on the order from our Democratic colleagues today, and that's fine. This committee is a place for debate on all issues that we cover. However, it's important to clarify that a recent letter sent by 33 state utility commissioners supporting Order 1920 represents only a small fraction of the 238 utility regulators around the country. One of Republicans' main concerns with Order 1920 is that it pursues a skewed categories of factors approach to transmission planning, prioritizing blue state renewable portfolio standards, green power subsidies designed to shift the generation mix, corporate emissions reduction commitments, and the Biden administration's goal of achieving a carbon-free power sector by 2035. The ultimate purpose here is clear. Prioritize those projects meant to serve an environmental agenda while creating a set of 7 broad benefits designed to assist transmission developers in socializing costs across a broader rate base. Republicans are not opposed to critical transmission projects that are needed to keep the lights on and utility bills affordable. But unfortunately, American consumers have seen their utility rates go up. And with this rule, they're going to see even higher rates because that cost will be shifted onto certain ratepayers. However, we're opposed to agency actions that will raise prices on consumers without reliability or cost benefits. Transmission is an increasingly costly component of electricity rates. The nation's largest grid operator, PJM, has reported that the transmission component of wholesale power costs has tripled over the last 10 years and now makes up almost 1/3 of wholesale power cost. Order 1920's categories of factors for transmission planning skirts this reality by not mentioning a factor every member of Congress and Public Utility Commissioner should care about, and that's reducing cost for the ratepayers. This concerning transmission planning policy is occurring in concert with a slew of EPA regulations that will result in reliable generation closing before the end of its useful life. and I think it's going to create a reliability crisis in this country. Members of the Committee on Energy and Commerce have heard time and again how EPA's actions, such as Clean Power Plan 2.0, revised particulate matter standard, the interstate transport for ozone, mercury, and air toxics rule, coal ash disposal, and effluent elimination limitation guidelines will increase costs on utilities, push them to retire reliable assets, and ultimately increase energy cost on the American people. I'll just say that we are going to have a reliability crisis, and we have a constant need, because demand for power is going up, of dispatchable energy build-out versus retirement. Chairman Phillips, publicly you have emphasized that you care deeply about affordability and reliability, and we do as well. I take you at your word and view that this is an opportunity to have a candid discussion about how FERC's actions are impacting those two essential goals. So I want to thank Chair Rogers for allowing us to hold this hearing today, and I look forward to today's questions. And with that, my ranking member is on her way. So how do y'all want to play this? And I'll go to ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for his opening statement, then I'll come back to Chair Rogers. Mr. Pallone's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome also all 5 FERC commissioners here this morning, especially Commissioners Rosner, C, and Chang, who were just sworn in over the last month and who haven't yet appeared before the committee. And I'm pleased that FERC is back to its full complement of 5 commissioners. Now, FERC's role is to ensure that Americans have access to reliable and affordable energy. For nearly a century, FERC and its predecessor, the Federal Power Commission, have been charged with ensuring that electricity and gas prices remain affordable. But how the Commission ensures that rates are just and reasonable has evolved over the decades. Over a quarter century ago, FERC issued Order 888, bringing competition to power markets across the country and lowering prices while ensuring that the bulk power grid remains reliable. FERC then issued Orders 890 and 1000, which aimed to eliminate discrimination and increase transparency in grid planning. And finally, just 2 months ago, FERC issued Order 1920, which builds upon those 3 earlier rules to focus on grid planning for the long term. FERC's authority to take these actions is clear. The Federal Power Act is explicit in conveying authority to FERC over the transmission of electricity in interstate commerce, and FERC's actions have repeatedly been upheld in the courts. In fact, courts have long deferred to FERC on its rate-making authorities without relying upon Chevron deference that the far-right majority of the Supreme Court threw out last month. Now, failing to plan is planning to fail. And the basic principle of Order 1920 is that grid planning is essential to maintaining just and reasonable rates. I agree, and I've been encouraged by the reception the rule has received from nearly every corner of the political world, except from congressional Republicans. It seems Republicans would prefer that their constituents be slapped with higher power bills because utilities are not required, for example, to plan for the impacts of severe weather on the grid. But more broadly, I'm deeply concerned that FERC's independence, which is critical to its ability to set rates, is under threat. During the Trump administration, Secretary of Energy Rick Perry ran roughshod over FERC's independence by pressuring it to adopt a rushed proposal that would have increased power prices to pay old polluting coal plants to stay online. Thankfully, FERC unanimously repelled that attack on its independence, but if Republicans get their way, next time it will be much worse. Trump's Project 2025 is a plan to consolidate power in the White House, gut checks and balances, and eliminate the independence of agencies like FERC. Trump's Project 2025 calls independent commissions like FERC constitutionally problematic. And I'd like my GOP colleagues, I'd like to remind them that Trump himself posted on his own website that he wants to bring independent regulatory agencies back under presidential authority. And that means that the next time a Republican president pressures FERC with a disastrous idea that would increase electricity prices for Americans, that FERC won't be able to fight back. The president would just fire any commissioner who disagreed with him, and Trump's Project 2025 is a way for extreme Republicans to take control of Americans' lives and freedoms. Trump has proposed requiring FERC to submit any proposed regulations for review, forcing every compliance order, every tariff revision, and every request to adjust rates to the White House for review. It's not enough they're using the Supreme Court to destroy the government's ability to function. They want to now use the power of the White House to do it too. And that's dangerous considering that Trump has absolutely no problem putting polluters over people. So I certainly hope that all of the commissioners before us today agree that FERC's independence is vital to its mission, but the reality is that even if FERC is under attack, or the reality is that they're, like so many agencies, independent agencies, are under attack from extreme far-right Republicans. And much has been made of Commissioner Christie's dissent to Order 1920, and I have to say I disagree with it, and I think it misses the mark. But he has a fundamental right to file that dissent despite the chairman's disagreement. If Republicans got their way, there might not be any more dissents on FERC orders. I like the fact that you can file dissent and you don't get fired, frankly, but that may change. And commissioners that refuse to follow the party line may simply be ousted from the commission entirely under what Trump's proposing. So the issues FERC deals with are complex, yet they impact every American's monthly energy bill, and that's why Congress chose to have an independent agency deal with these issues rather than one firmly embedded within the presidency, and I think it's vital that we keep it that way. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Chairman yields back. I now recognize the chair of the full committee, Ms. Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Just listening to the ranking member, I'm thinking, I'm concerned about the independent agencies being currently attacked by well-funded far left. So we're doing our job today in the Energy and Commerce Committee as the elected representatives of the people in Congress. This isn't about the administration. This is about us and an independent agency that's before us. And I'm really pleased that all 5 commissioners are here today. I'd like to offer a warm welcome to the newest members also. FERC was established by Congress as an independent agency within the Department of Energy through the Department of Energy Organization Act of 1977. And while FERC is an independent agency, it still answers to Congress and must carry out the mission that Congress directs it to. Congress established FERC as an economic regulator to ensure that electricity, natural gas, and oil is delivered to the American people safely, securely, and at a reasonable price. In order to achieve this, we need solutions that bring down costs for Americans who are currently suffering under the burden of exploding costs across the board, including rising electric and utility rates. Expanding energy with an all-of-the-above strategy will ensure Americans won't have to worry about rationing energy in the summer or winter months, or having to make tough choices about whether to pay the electric bill or buy groceries for their family. That requires FERC, all of you, to adhere to the core mission, especially as America's energy and economic security is increasingly under attack. Over the past 4 years, this administration, what we've seen from this administration and the Democrats, has really wreaked havoc on a nation's economy, energy prices, and our grid and pipeline infrastructure. The administration and Democrats have chosen to prioritize the interests of radical environmental activists at the expense of the American people, eliminating jobs and investments for American energy workers, making us dangerously dependent on the Chinese Communist Party for our energy supply chains, and forcing early retirement of our most affordable and reliable power plants. Given FERC's independence and mission, you must step up and take action to protect consumers. But sadly, it seems FERC has lost sight of its mission. FERC has the responsibility to ensure that rates for the interstate transmission of electricity and natural gas are, quote, just and reasonable. It also has a responsibility to issue timely permits for pipelines, hydropower projects, and LNG export facilities when they are in the public interest of Americans. The Commission must do more to exercise your responsibility as an independent agency and refocus on the core congressionally directed mission. After all, we do believe in a government of the people, by the people, for the people. FERC also recently announced a new transmission rule which advanced along partisan lines. The new rule will raise energy prices and trample on states' authority over energy infrastructure. It will force some states to shoulder the cost for transmission lines with no actual benefits for their own communities, especially in rural areas. The Commission has also slow-walked permitting for pipelines and LNG facilities, which directly impact the supply and price of natural gas. At a time when more than half the nation is at an elevated risk for blackouts, we must do more to unleash American energy rather than throttle it. That means starting with meaningful infrastructure permitting reforms that reduce energy costs for Americans and ensure the U.S. can reach its full energy potential. I cannot say this enough. Energy is foundational to everything we do. It's what keeps the lights on. It heats our homes. It cools our homes, powers hospitals, businesses, transportation. It's been energy. It has been American energy, access to affordable and reliable energy over the past 100 years that has made America the leader, raised our standard of living for Americans all over this nation, driven technological innovation, and improved the health and well-being of all Americans. We need to continue protecting and building on that legacy. Today's hearing is an opportunity for the members to hold FERC accountable, understand how recent actions, like the new transmission rule, will impact people's financial security and our nation's energy security. I thank you again for being here. This is an important discussion on behalf of every person in this nation. I yield back.
Julie yields back. Ranking member DeGette is running, because of the time change, running behind. So she's going to submit her opening statement for the record. So we're going to move right into our witnesses, and that concludes members' opening statements. Chair, I'd like to remind members, pursuant to committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. Again, I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today and taking the time to testify before the subcommittee. Each witness will have an opportunity to give an opening statement followed by a round of questions from the members. There's a set of lights in front of you as you give your statements, and this is probably for the new commissioners. Green, you're good to go. Yellow, time to start wrapping up. Red, I'm gonna give you a little leeway, but probably need to wrap up, and I don't wanna have to raise the gavel. So let's keep it within 5 minutes in the essence of time. Our witnesses today are the commissioners of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the Honorable Chairman Willie Phillips. Welcome back, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Mark Christie, Commissioner. Welcome back, Mr. Christie. And the Honorable David Rosner, the Honorable Lindsay S, and the Honorable Judy Chang, new commissioners to FERC. Welcome to the committee hearing. We appreciate you being here. I'll now recognize Chairman Phillips for a 5-minute opening statement.
Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member DeGette, Chair Rogers, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting us here today to testify regarding the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and our work on behalf of the American people. I am particularly pleased to appear before you alongside my 3 new colleagues, as well as Commissioner Christie, as part of a full 5-member bipartisan commission. FERC's mission is to ensure that Americans have access to reliable, safe, secure, and economically efficient energy at a reasonable cost. Energy is the single most important commodity we produce as a nation. Access to reliable and affordable supplies of energy is necessary for American families and for our nation's economy to remain the largest and most dynamic in the world. With that in mind, I am pleased to share with you some of the most important steps that the Commission has taken to ensure reliability and affordability during my 1.5-year tenure as chair. Let's begin with electric transmission. The electric transmission grid is the backbone of the American economy and an essential aspect of our national security. Electricity demand continues to grow, and ensuring that we have a robust, well-planned electric transmission grid is a reliability imperative. It is also an affordability imperative. The grid is what gives those same consumers access to diverse, low-cost sources of electricity that are necessary to ensure energy bills remain just and reasonable. Earlier this year, to address those imperatives, the Commission issued orders number 1920 and 1977. Together, these 2 rulemakings represent a tremendous step forward in how we plan, pay for, and permit the electric transmission infrastructure we need so badly for the reliability and affordability of our grid. Order number 1920 requires utilities to plan today for the factors that we know will drive tomorrow's reliability and affordability needs, while requiring that customers pay for new transmission only to the extent that they benefit from that infrastructure. Let me say that again. you don't benefit, you don't pay, period. Order number 1977 implements Congress's amendments to the Federal Power Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which clarified the Commission's limited role in siting electric transmission in a manner that respects and accommodates states' primary role in siting electric transmission. Those two rulemakings build on the success of Order number 2023, the generator interconnection rulemaking we issued last summer. Order number 2023 took several important steps so that generating resources can interconnect to the grid in a timely and cost-effective manner, including a shift to a first-ready, first-served model and the establishment of firm, steady deadlines. In addition, in the years since we last appeared before the committee, the Commission has taken several other critically important actions to ensure reliability and grid security. That includes approving new mandatory reliability standards for inverter-based resources, approving new mandatory reliability standards covering generators' cold weather preparedness operations. We have worked to further investigate and promote best practices regarding physical security, cybersecurity, extreme weather events, and black start capabilities, among others. It is also important that electricity market mechanisms are designed to address electric reliability. That is why we held two forums on resource adequacy, and we have approved various market reforms that ensure that generating resources are appropriately compensated for the reliability benefits they provide to the system. As I have mentioned and maintained since the day I joined the Commission, reliability is, and it always must be, the Commission's job number one. I'm confident that these and other actions we have taken over the past year put that promise into practice. Finally, I will close by noting that we have continued our efforts to streamline the Commission's permitting processes and timely approve new projects. When assessing whether an infrastructure project is in the public interest, the Commission considers environmental impacts, including those related to environmental justice. As chairman, I've made it a priority that environmental justice communities and landowners are able to meaningfully participate in our processes and have their voices heard. I'm happy to report that the Commission is continuing to do everything we can within our authority to facilitate the development of infrastructure we need to unlock the nation's energy resources. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward.
Thank you, Chair Phillips. Commissioner Christie, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair Duncan, Ranking Member DeJet. Oh, I have to.
Maybe pull that mic just a little closer for the
Okay.
script. Thank you.
How's that? Okay. Okay, Chair Duncan, Ranking Member DeJet, Ranking Member Rogers, who's left, and, Chair Rogers, Ranking Member Pallone, who's still here, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity again. I've been here on FERC 3 years. I think this is the third time I've been here, so thank you again for the privilege of appearing in front of you. I'll deliver essentially the same message I've been delivering previously in previous appearances and also on the other side, and that is we as the United States are heading for potentially catastrophic consequences in terms of the reliability of our electric power system. I'm not trying to be melodramatic and using a term like potentially catastrophic, but I think everyone would agree when we have power outages that go on for hours or days, that's catastrophic. It's not only has severe economic consequences, but as we saw during Uri in Texas, Winter Storm Uri, it actually is life-threatening. So what is the essence of this threat? What is leading us to these potentially catastrophic consequences? It really boils down to two things. One's on the supply side, one's on the demand side. On the supply side, we're losing dispatchable generating resources with many years of useful lives remaining. They're retiring far too quickly, and they're retiring in quantities that threaten our ability to keep the lives on. Now, the supply problem is not the addition of intermittent resources like wind and solar. The supply problem is the subtraction of the dispatchable resources like coal and gas at a pace that is really simply not sustainable. Now, it's not just my opinion. The nation's largest grid operators, PJM, SPP, MISO, have all been warning about this. And they've also been warning, all three of the largest grid operators, that the EPA's new power plant rule is going to exacerbate this problem. It's going to cause a lot more dispatchable resources to close or shut down. So this is what we're heading for. And let me just illustrate an example of what I'm talking about. So last week, 8 days ago, right here in PJM, and we're in PJM. That electricity keeping the lights on is being dispatched by PJM. PJM, last Tuesday at 5:35 was the hottest day of that heat wave. PJM was dispatching 153 gigawatts of power to meet load. Of that 153 gigawatts last Tuesday, a week from yesterday, 86% of the power that was keeping the lights on in PJM to hit that peak was either gas, nuclear, or coal. 86%. And these are the resources, particularly coal, that PJM is warning us. Okay, so remember that number, 153 gigawatts it took to meet peak. PJM is saying they're going to lose 40 to 50 gigawatts of that capacity in just the next 3 to 4 years. So the arithmetic is just, it doesn't work, okay? Now, that's on the demand side. On the supply side, on the demand side, everyone knows what's happening with the tremendous increases in demand that we're seeing from data centers, including artificial intelligence, which dramatically ramps up the demand, as well as crypto miners. So it's really supply and demand. On the supply side, we're losing the dispatchable resources we need. On the demand side, we're seeing load increases like we've never seen in the last 20 years. So the numbers are just simply not adding up. Now, PJM, again, is telling us that in the queues, in PJM's queue as well as most of the queues, 97% of the resources that are in the queues are intermittent. So simply clearing the queues doesn't really solve the problem that we have, because a 1 gigawatt of an intermittent resource is simply not equal to 1 gigawatt nameplate of a dispatchable resource. So really the problem we're facing is loss of supply, increase in demand. And that is what is leading us in all the RTOs. All of them have been very clear about this. NERC, the North American Energy Reliability Organization, also has been very clear about this. We are simply coming to a situation where we're not going to have enough power to meet the demand increases that we're seeing. And so with that, I'll be happy to answer questions about reasons this is coming, what can be done about it. But that's the core problem. I mean, we're heading for and again, I don't like to be melodramatic, but we're heading for potentially catastrophic circumstances where we simply cannot meet demand, and that means we don't keep the lights on. And that will be definitely catastrophic. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Christie. Commissioner Rosner, welcome, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Well, good morning, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member DeJette, Chair Rogers, and Ranking Member Pallone, and also members of the subcommittees. I'm humbled to appear before you today alongside my colleagues to testify on behalf of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission regarding its important work for the American people. As a new commissioner, I'm proud to join with my colleagues to uphold FERC's tradition as an independent, expert body that continuously strives to live up to Congress's vision for an independent, bipartisan regulator of our increasingly complex energy system. FERC's leaders and civil servants work tirelessly to guide the Commission's decisions towards sound, legally durable outcomes that hold true to the agency's statutory authority and make our country and our allies more energy secure. The Commission's core responsibility, its job number one, is to ensure the reliable operation of the country's electrical grid. None of our economic or policy priorities can be achieved without energy reliability. Consumers expect it, they deserve it, and it's FERC's most sacred duty to ensure it. It is undeniable that the U.S. energy system is in transition and that the pace of change on both the supply and demand side is unprecedented. Maintaining reliable operation of the electric grid at reasonable cost to consumers as this transition unfolds is both a challenge and an opportunity for the Commission and for the country. It is a task that I'm both honored and humbled to take on. This means many things, but especially it means that the Commission must remain vigilant and respect the realities of the resources that power our economy today. But that alone is not sufficient. The Commission must also keep its eye on the horizon to ensure that its legacy of providing reliable, safe, secure, and affordable energy to all Americans continues. That means continuing to faithfully implement the Commission's longstanding policy of resource and fuel neutrality to allow the next generation of technologies to play their role in the energy system. It means continuing to harden the energy system to withstand evolving threats to reliability, including weather, physical, and cyber risks. And it means continuing to ensure our energy affordability, safety, and reliability through timely review of needed energy infrastructure while considering the views from all parties. And finally, it also means protecting consumers by honoring the Commission's obligation under the Federal Power Act to ensure rates are just and reasonable. I look forward to working with my fellow commissioners on these important issues. That concludes my remarks today, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Rosner. Commissioner C, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Duncan, Ranking Member DeJette, Chair Rogers, Ranking Member Pallone, and all the members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me and my fellow commissioners at FERC to appear before you today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to testify, and especially that I'm able to do so as part of the newly full 5-member commission.
Yeah,
As one
could
of
you
those
pull the mic up just a little bit? We transcribe everything and make sure
course.
everyone can hear. Thank you.
Is this better? There we go. All right. Well, as one of those newest commissioners here, it's an honor and a pleasure to serve with my distinguished colleagues, both the two who have served so well for the past few years and the two who were sworn in immediately before and after me this past month. My 3 weeks now officially on the job have also deepened my respect for the FERC staff and their expertise and commitment to the Commission's mission. I'm humbled by the chance to add my experience to the mix as I join my new colleagues, and I'm eager to jump into the timely and critical issues facing the Commission today. And as I get started doing just that, staffing up my office and preparing to vote on the Commission's upcoming matters, I'm keeping at the center of my vision the same focus you've heard from all of my colleagues. Reliability and affordability are the Commission's most important jobs. Keeping the lights on is an economic necessity, and it's essential to Americans' day-to-day lives, health, and security. I take that mission seriously as I'm beginning to analyze the important and complex matters ahead of me as a commissioner. I'm also mindful that my colleagues and I are taking on that task in a time of dynamic change. New technologies and generation sources are offering real promise. At the same time, many baseload plant retirements are raising real alarms. And the increasing demand loads from data centers, electrification, and other consumer and policy-driven changes heighten the stakes for what ensuring reliability needs to look like in today's markets and tomorrow's. I appreciate the subcommittee's focus on all of these changing realities. They are and will remain areas of intense focus for me too, as I continue diving into my new role as a commissioner. I'm mindful that how FERC goes about this work is critical too. My prior role as a state attorney gave me great respect for the balance in the energy sector between federal and state authority. The state's decisions on generation and local distribution matters reflect important local priorities and strengths, and I had the opportunity to see firsthand the way that federal regulations can affect real Americans, both for good and sometimes for bad. So I aim to bring those lessons with me as I transition now to the federal side, approaching FERC's different responsibilities with both support for the states as they carry out their functions and an eye for how their decisions affect the nation's overall energy mix and needs. I also take seriously the changing legal landscape facing the Commission and other federal agencies today. I believe accountability matters as my colleagues and I do the public's work. So for instance, in response to the Supreme Court's recent decision limiting agency discretion and reducing the margin of error for agency orders, I welcome the important check judicial review offers in our separation of power system. But perhaps most importantly, when it comes to how I view my as a commissioner on the front end, when it comes to making decisions as opposed to that scope of judicial review on the back end, I continue to view my duty as fundamentally the same. As a commissioner, my responsibility is to approach the law and the facts before me with a fair and open mind, striving to reach the best results with my colleagues in each case. And that approach mirrors my overall philosophy in not going beyond the authority Congress has entrusted to FERC, but not constricting that authority either. Understanding jurisdiction's limits should lead to more clarity on what matters most. And especially given the many urgent issues facing the Commission and the energy sector, many of which we have already discussed and I know that we'll be fleshing out more today, it's an understatement to say that plenty of mission-critical work falls within FERC's statutory lanes. So I'm eager to work with my colleagues as we respond to all of these changes. As one of the newest members of this nonpartisan independent commission, I deeply appreciate the different perspectives and sets of experience we bring with us. I'm confident we'll be up to the task. I also look forward to discussing more of these issues with you all today and working with you and your staffs in the months ahead. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Chang, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Duncan, Ranking Member DeJette, Chair Rogers, and Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for the invitation to testify this morning, and thank you for the valuable oversight role that you undertake. This is my first opportunity to testify before this subcommittee, and I am honored to appear here today with my colleagues as part of a fully staffed commission. To just briefly introduce myself, I recently joined the commission after more than 2 decades working in the energy industry in a variety of roles. I did spend my formative years in developing countries, which provided me with a deep appreciation and for the value of reliable and resilient grid. This value is even more critical today as our country experiences and anticipates rapidly growing electricity usage from manufacturing facilities and data centers, plus electrification of transportation and heating, just as Commissioner Christie had just mentioned. We must meet these demands while keeping our systems resilient to increasingly frequent extreme weather events as we're witnessing around the country. This is a major challenge and has been a focus of the Commission for some time now, and I commit to help address these topics. I have deep experience in analyzing the economics and the public policy implications around our energy systems. I've worked with private companies, including all types of public utilities across the country, and in developing strategies for meeting the energy needs of customers. I had held a leadership role in Massachusetts state government where I experienced firsthand the importance of having adequate infrastructure, efficient market mechanisms and frameworks, and viable approaches to grow our economy while navigating policies and programs that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Drawing on my background and professional experience in both the private sector and in state government, I appreciate the foundational importance of ensuring the reliability and the affordability of our energy systems. These imperatives are, for good reasons, front and center in every utility executive and government leader's mind, and they are prerequisites for a robust economy and the successful execution of the energy transition in which this country finds itself today. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, given its responsibilities in the electric, gas, and oil sectors, plays a crucial role in ensuring both reliability and affordability of our energy systems. As a commissioner, one of my priorities is to ensure a robust and reliable transmission system, including the use of advanced technologies to deliver affordable energy for all consumers. This is paramount to the economic growth of our nation, and this is how the United States will continue to lead the world and compete on the global stage in technological innovation and the infrastructure development. I also commit to working closely with my colleagues and collaboratively with them to ensure that we provide clear, timely, and thoughtful guidance for the industry to develop and retain the energy infrastructure needed to advance our economy and reliably serve the American people. Again, thank you very much for having me here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, and thank all the commissioners for your testimony. We'll now move into the question and answer portion of the hearing, and I'll begin the questioning. Recognize myself for 5 minutes. FERC Order number 1920 makes sweeping and controversial changes to the regional transmission planning and cost allocation rules over the objections of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners and dozens of individual states. Opposition by NARUC is significant, and they represent the interest of all 50 states, and they only engage on regulatory matters based on resolutions passed by its 238-member commissioners. NARUC opposition is a serious blow to Order 1920, and it's concerning that FERC dismissed serious flaws with such blatant disregard. I'd like to insert for the record NARUC's request for a rehearing, which FERC recently denied with the unanimous consent so ordered. I'd also like to, now that FERC has denied a rehearing, at last count, 19 states have filed for appeal in federal court: Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kansas. List goes on, including my state of South Carolina, Texas, Utah, West Virginia. Chairman Phillips, I want to ask you about Order 1920. Do you think that it is, quote, just and reasonable, unquote, to force residents in one state to pay for the renewable electricity mandates of another state?
Thank you for the question, Chair Duncan. First of all, let me be clear. We just received a letter, I think it was 2 days ago, from 33 commissioners around the country, geographically diverse, bipartisan, both Republicans and Democrats, praising Order Number 1920. I was a state regulator for over 7 years. I have never seen that many commissioners come together and say the same thing and praise anything. So this alone is evidence, and I've been traveling all around this country. I can tell you that I've received such great feedback. There are so many people excited about the work that FERC is doing to expand our grid, to meet the reliability and affordability challenges that we have. You talked about costs. Our Order Number 1920 adheres to our cost causation principle, which has decades long been recognized by the courts and bipartisan majorities of the commission. That is, the costs have to be allocated roughly commensurate with the benefits. Again, to put it another way, if you don't benefit, you don't pay.
Just so in your opinion, it's okay for residents of other states to have higher rates to pay for transmission and green initiatives and other mandates in other states?
I think that's a great question, and I think it's important to correct the record a little bit. That is not what Order Number 1920
Cost
does.
allocation is, Mr. Chairman. The letter you mentioned, that's just a small fraction of the 238 utility regulators around the country. I don't move on in essence of time. Do you believe the Federal Power Act authorizes FERC to override states on regional planning cost allocation?
When it comes to cost allocation, costs are roughly allocated, roughly commensurate with benefits. That is our cost causation principle. Nothing has changed. No one has rewritten the rule book when it comes to cost allocation.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Christie, you offered a strong dissent to Order 1920. Will you comment on the ways the order violates the Federal Power Act?
I don't think it's going to produce just and reasonable rates, and that's our duty under the federal.
Your mic, please.
Overall, I don't think it's going to produce just and reasonable rates, and that's our core duty under the Federal Power Act. Federal Power Act is, at its very essence, a consumer protection statute, and our job is to be a consumer protection agency. I don't think this rule fulfills that role. Let me mention to you, if I give a little bit of time, about the context of this rule. So this rule was not adopted in a vacuum. It was adopted 2 years after we did a proposed rule, and the proposed rule gave the states a far more robust role than what ended up in the final rule. And with regard to NARUC, I would also say this. I was a state regulator for 17 years, and I participated in all the NARUC processes, and I know how NARUC works. And NARUC works by consensus, and it works by vote, and NARUC files its comments in proceedings at FERC. And they filed very well considered. They took them a long time to get their comments. They go through multiple committees, and when they come out with a position, that is NARUC's position, and they represent the overwhelming majority of state regulators. There's no question that the overwhelming majority of state regulators do not like Order 1920. They've been very clear about that. And the reason I don't like it is the reason I don't like it, which is because the state role that was promised in the proposed rule, which I voted for it, the chair voted for it, every member of FERC voted for it. It was a bipartisan compromise. The state role was effectively gutted from the proposed rule 2 years ago to what ended up in Order 1920. So that's why the state regulators don't like it, and that's why I don't like it for a number of other reasons. And we could spend many hours talking about detail because there's a lot of detail, but fundamentally, it takes away the state regulators' ability to protect their consumers. And the reason I'm so adamant about the state role is because as a state regulator for 17 years, I know that state regulators are the front line and the last line of defense for consumers. And that's why it's so important that state regulators have the authority to play the role that they were promised in the proposed rule and which was taken away in the final rule.
Thank you for that. Out of time, I'm going to have some additional questions that I'll submit on gas pipelines and the position of FERC, but that will be submitted. Ask you guys to respond. And I'll recognize and welcome the ranking member to get for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Phillips, now it's true that transmission siting is going to be critical to our nation's electrical grid over the next decade, isn't it? Yes. And the Regional Planning Rule, Order 1920, That marks the first time the commission has ever squarely addressed the need for long-term transmission planning. Isn't that correct?
That's correct in the way we
Now,
address it.
So the chairman was saying to you that Order 1920 makes some states pay for other states, and you said that's not true, and you tried to explain why, and he wouldn't let you. So would you like to clarify your answer on that, sir?
Certainly. We rely upon the longstanding cost causation principle that FERC has adhered to for decades. It has been recognized by the courts. We know that costs have to be allocated roughly commensurate with the benefits to our consumers. That's the rule that's the foundation of our cost causation rule in Order Number 1920.
So you're not essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're figuring out the causation, and then you're allocating it according to that.
Absolutely. Just as we did under Order Number 1000. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, you testified that 33 state regulatory commissioners recently submitted a letter in support of the regional planning rule. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to put that letter into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Chairman, can you share your perspective on how the transmission siting rule and the regional planning rule will support the reliability and security of our power grid, which is so deeply needed?
Certainly. Order Number 1920 is at its heart about reliability. We know that what's happening right now, what we're doing to build out our system, it is not going to get us where we need to go. We know that there are drivers putting pressure on our system. Some of them have been mentioned. We have data centers, AI, quantum computing, the return of industrial manufacturing. These are all things that we know. Demand is going up, and Commissioner Christie's right. There is a concern about retirements going down. By building out the transmission that we know we're going to need over a long-term, 20-year time horizon, you have no choice but to identify solutions to address these problems.
And if we don't identify these solutions, what's going to happen?
We will be facing a difficult reliability problem in our country.
We're already facing issues with our grid, which we see in times of extreme weather and other times, all the time now, right?
That's right.
So if we don't address this, is it going to get better on its own?
It is not. And we have to weigh the cost of inaction.
Why is addressing cost sharing in the manner that the regional planning rule does so crucial to the future of our grid?
It's important. Right now, we know if we do nothing, costs are going to continue to go up. I was a state regulator, I mentioned, for many years. I saw the cost for transmission go up every single year. Seemed that it was out of our control. We're taking control. We, the commission, under 1920, we're looking out over the long term, doing what we know the reality on the ground requires.
Thank you. Commissioner Rosner, I'm wondering if you can talk to me a little bit about interregional transmission, because to me, that's really one of the most important things we can do to enhance electrical reliability and to make power more affordable.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Interregional, I guess I would say that I agree with NERC that interregional transmission is a key solution to some of the reliability challenges that the country is facing. That alone is not enough. We also need generation on those lines.
Great. And Commissioner Chang, I just want to ask you if you can magnify that and tell me what steps do you think might be necessary towards interregional transmission to improving that?
Thank you for your question. Interregional transmission will be important, as it has been in the past, and our current regulation and the process used by many grid operators limits the way interregional transmissions are being developed. So I definitely look forward to having an opportunity to work with my colleagues to really start thinking more seriously about interregional transmission planning. And I think, starting with regional makes a lot of sense, and then we will tackle and really grow the ability for regions to interchange and increase their interchange amongst adjacent regions.
Thank you. I have a question here about the roundtable that Chairman Phillips convened on environmental justice and equity and infrastructure permitting decisions. But I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, so I will submit that for the record and look forward to your answer. Thank you.
I was
Yeah,
giving
back.
you a little leniency, but yeah, she'll
You
submit
want-
that
you
for
wanna
the
hear the
record. So, no. I'll now recognize the chair of the full committee, Chair Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Clearly, we are facing a growing grid reliability crisis that's jeopardizing our economy and our safety. According to the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, 2/3 of the nation is facing an elevated risk of outages. The nation's grid operators agree the causes are state renewable mandates, bans on natural gas, lack of pipeline capacity, and new EPA regulations that will close power plants. Chairman Phillips, do you agree with our nation's grid operators?
Yes, I share the concern about the reliability challenges that we have ahead.
You testified in previous hearings that you had very limited interaction with EPA in the development of new regulations for power plants. What steps have you taken to improve coordination and communications between FERC and EPA?
So I'm glad to report that last fall, we had a technical conference at FERC where we invited EPA, their leadership, as well as utility leadership around the country to talk about their potential rules. We took feedback, gave it to them, submitted it in their record, and EPA actually changed the final rule to include a reliability emergency off-ramp based upon the feedback that they got from FERC.
Are you concerned about the new EPA regulations and their impact on closing power plants across this country?
We are always concerned about reliability. It's job number one. To be clear, we provided feedback. That feedback was incorporated. We believe FERC is doing all that we can to protect the reliability of our grid.
Thank you. Chairman Christie, do you believe there's more work that we could do to improve coordination between FERC and EPA?
I think we should have weighed in much more with EPA than we did. We sent them a transcript of a hearing, and I think that was it. The problem with the power plant rule, and again, the grid operators, PJM, SPP, ERCOT, MISO, they all filed comment at EPA, and they were very blunt about what the rule was going to do, the EPA power plant rule. They were very blunt. It was going to materially degrade reliability. So they stood up and let EPA know that. We submitted a transcript, which had some testimony that went both ways, but the worst testimony was from Mr. Goffman of EPA when I asked him, have you done any analysis of whether generating units can finance the compliance? Because if you can't finance compliance, it doesn't matter what the timelines are. And he essentially admitted, no, we haven't done any serious analysis of whether they can finance compliance. Because if you can't finance compliance, these generating units are going to close down. So I think that that's going to have a tremendously deleterious effect on our grid reliability.
Thank you. Hydropower, the original source of renewable energy, produces far superior power to weather-dependent Chinese solar panels and batteries. Hydropower keeps the lights on, powers our economy in the Pacific Northwest. 75% of our electricity is hydro in Washington State. It's reliable, it's renewable, and it's imperative when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining. So we see EPA shutting down power plants, and we also see efforts by this administration to tear out dams in the Pacific Northwest. None of this makes sense to me. Chairman Phillips, as you know, I've led an effort for multiple Congresses to reform FERC's hydropower licensing process to preserve our existing fleet and expand hydropower production where it can. I think you agree that the FERC licensing process could be modernized. I wanted to ask, since hydropower is so critical to grid reliability, especially in a state like Washington State, what is FERC doing to prioritize the relicensing of these existing hydropower facilities?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too agree, and I support our hydro facilities around the country, including pump storage as well. We know that there are a lot. We have over almost a third of our hydro facilities around the country will be up for relicensing between now and 2030. We are aware of it. We're working hard to staff up. We're hiring. Everybody here and everybody watching, FERC is hiring. And we want you to come and be a part of our team. But we are getting prepared and we are ready to address this need.
Thank you. Clearly, it's critical infrastructure. The Columbia Snake River system is critical infrastructure, amazing investments made by the federal government. What specific actions do you believe, Chairman Phillips, Congress can take to simplify the process and ensure reasonable timeframes for decisions and that these decisions are met?
So I've made streamlining our processes regarding infrastructure across the board a priority. And we've seen those timelines come down. With regard to hydro, we instituted, I call it a fast lane. It's like an expedited process.
Okay, I'm gonna interrupt real quick, because I want to hear more. We can talk about that separately. What would you say to those who suggest we should tear out the dams in favor of solar power?
I'm not aware of anyone making that particular request, but I'm an all of the above. I have an all of the above approach. I believe we need every tool that we can get to help America address our concerns and continue to be the leader of the world when it comes to energy.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you. I yield back.
I think we've had a hearing where that comment was actually made by someone, but Ranking Member Pallone is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the sake of time, and I want to cover a lot, I'm just asking my questions of you, Chairman Phillips. And I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about Order 1920 and FERC's authority. In the Federal Power Act, Congress directed FERC to ensure power rates are just and reasonable. It also explicitly granted FERC regulatory authority over interstate transmission. And while it grants FERC discretion on how to best carry out those responsibilities, that's not deference. It's an explicit grant of power to the agency. So, Chairman Phillips, could you talk about how the Commission's authority to issue Order 1920 flows from these facts that I mentioned?
Yes, sir. Under the Federal Power Act, the Commission is tasked with having jurisdiction over electric transmission rate, interstate rates, and the practices that affect those rates. It is clear that Order number 1920 concerns long-term regional planning and cost allocation. Those are practices that impact transmission rates.
And building upon that, in South Carolina Public Service Authority versus FERC, the D.C. Circuit explicitly found that FERC had the authority to issue Order 1000, which also dealt with regional grid planning. So again, Chairman Phillips, given that Order 1920 deals with regional grid planning over the long term, is there any reason to suspect that Order 1920 would be on different legal footing from Order 1000?
No, Order number 1920 builds upon Order number 1000.
All right. Now, I want to turn to a topic I discussed in my opening statement, and that's FERC's independence. And Chairman Phillips, could you briefly discuss why it's so important to FERC's core responsibilities that the Commission retain its independence?
You know, I talk all the time, Congressman, about how FERC is an independent agency and that we guard that independence jealously. I think it is a part of our trust relationship with the public, that they know that when it comes to FERC, that we will act independently and in the best interest of the public.
All right. And then finally, I wanted to ask, you've spoken a lot about how the electric sector is only as reliable as its least reliable component, and how the lack of mandatory gas reliability standards could threaten electric reliability. So studies have shown that natural gas plants and pipelines are disproportionately vulnerable to failure, with significant outages occurring during winter storms Elliott and Uri. So again, Chairman Phillips, could you talk about how gas reliability impacts electric reliability, and if you think Congress should enact legislation to mandate reliability standards for gas? And actually, I didn't think I'd have this much time, so you have 2 minutes, if you like.
So thank you for the question. When it comes to reliability of our system, again, it is job number one. We make when it comes to our gas, natural gas, you don't have to look any further than Winter Storm Uri, Winter Storm Elliott, some of the extreme weather events that we've seen on our system that have caused unplanned outages. You can call them unplanned, but when something happens every other year, you cannot call it unexpected. It is critical that we maintain the reliability of our gas. We have these two systems. We have the electric side and the gas side, and we treat them as if they're completely separate. But in reality, they are increasingly interdependent upon each other. Now, we have an ERO, an Electric Reliability Organization, for the electric side. We don't have a reliability organization that is required to maintain the reliability of our gas side. I believe that is a gap in our reliability regime. And I believe that there should be some agency responsible for that gap. It doesn't have to be FERC. It could be like NERC, an independent agency that has delegated authority, but someone has to fill that gap. It is too important to our end users and our consumers that we make sure that when you go over and hit that switch, that the lights come on. And that's what this is about. That's also why Order number 1920 is so important. And I'm so excited about the work that got us here for 1920, because we're going to bring on more of the resources that we know we need for our system.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman yields back. I'll now go to Mr. Guthrie from Kentucky for 5 minutes.
Thank you, thank you. So Commissioner Christie, I want to talk about your opening statement. The example that you gave us is stark, and it's real, and this is the greatest catastrophe, could be one of the greatest catastrophes in American history that we can avoid if we react to it. And so when you bring those examples, I'm sure they had those kind of examples in Europe. We know they just had elections in Europe and almost everybody in power, regardless of your political power, was thrown out. And a big part of it was their climate policy. I know my family's in the manufacturing business. People in similar industries for us in Germany have 3 times the power cost that we have here in the United States. It's absolutely uncompetitive. And so it's a big concern, and you know, they put in a lot of these policies based on the fact, predictions years ago, that there would be no polar ice caps by 2016. I think we still have polar ice caps. The Earth would be uninhabitable by 2023. Obviously, that's not true. We're here. And so when they take these I call climate exaggerators, and they take those comments and they put in policies that hurt their economies, I can tell you that the German people in the German government are begging us to send more exports of natural gas and liquid natural gas because of what they've done to their own economy. So it's concern, and then we look at China. We did the Paris Accords, which essentially exempted China. And when it got to the time that China was supposed to participate, where they kind of committed somewhere in the future, Secretary Kerry's enforcement mechanism was, we'll shame them into it if they choose not to. That was the enforcement mechanism. That's a quote from Secretary Kerry. So here we are with China. Here we are, our great global competitor, who view themselves as China means Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, and that's what they're trying to do, and that's where they're trying to go. And we're competing with a country that is increasing, average of 2 power plants per week. So as the economy that of the future demands more power, as you said, and we are providing less supply, those 2 things cannot work. And so my question, knowing that, I know what Congress needs to do. I feel strongly about Congress. How can FERC address these challenges of electricity needs from your perspective?
Well, FERC's role, of course, is primarily as a rate regulator under the Federal Power Act. One thing that's important to understand is we're a reliability regulator from the standpoint of setting standards for NERC. NERC sets the standards, we approve them. The states are the ones who decides what generating units get built, what generating units get retired. That's a state matter. FERC's role is largely to say, because we regulate the regional transmission organizations, if there's a reliability problem on the horizon, we're sort of like, it's our job to point it out and say, look what's coming. Now, in regulating the markets, we have a direct regulatory authority, and if the markets are one of the reasons that we're losing dispatchable resources or we're not building sufficient dispatchable resources, then that implicates FERC's reliability authority, because we're regulating the markets, and their market designs and rate structures can determine what, in those, where you have a market. Now, a large part of this country are not in an RTO market. Southeast is not in an RTO market. They're in what's called an IRP type of structure. And those decisions in the non-RTO regions are clearly up to state regulators, because they approve the integrated resource plan, which determines what their utilities build or don't build. So FERC's role is, from reliability, is number one, raise the alarm when we see the trends that we see. Secondly, regulate the national standard setter, which is NERC. And then thirdly, in our regulation of the markets, look at how those markets are affecting not only prices, but also how they're affecting reliability.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And Commissioner C, and maybe Commissioner Christie, I doubt I'll have time, but I'll answer this as well. Chevron, we've heard some people already here on this committee apologize that the Supreme Court gave us back the authority that we should exercise. So just in Chevron, I'm not going to regurgitate what Chevron is, but where might there be opportunities for Congress to be more explicit in legislating and affecting your authorities?
I think one of the things that the Supreme Court said in the decision that did away with Chevron deference is that certainly this is Congress's responsibility. When Congress is clear in a statute, sorry, we'll try this again. When Congress is clear in a statute that it wants an agency to exercise its expertise and discretion, it can say so. And the Supreme Court was clear that courts can and must respect that. So I think there is certainly room for Congress to speak clearly when it comes to that sort of agency expertise and discretion, even in light of that decision.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Christie, I don't have time left, so I'll yield back.
Chairman yields back, and I'll go to my friend from California, Mr. Peters, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you, start off by thanking you, Chairman Phillips, for the strong action as chair over the past year. Orders 1920 and 1977, focusing on transmission planning and backstop siting for national interest transmission, will be essential for industry to improve reliability, build resilience to extreme weather events, and add necessary generation resources to meet America's electricity needs into the future. Now, that's not my opinion. That is a quote from the North American Reliability Corporation, the national entity in charge of ensuring a reliable and secure grid. And I just want to say, like, we are facing an undeniable spike in the need for electricity. And when we talk about all of the above, it's got to include transmission. Not just generation. I don't think we should be in this false battle between the two. We're going to need both. And we also know that a robust grid that's interregional can provide benefits in terms of reliability and cost competition for consumers. So I think we should take advantage of being the United States of America. I think sometimes my colleagues look at in the energy context and read it as the untied states of America, but united is better. I want to just emphasize that these rules do not mandate a single transmission line gets built or provide any new authority to impose costs. I appreciate your assurance, Chairman Phillips, that the people who benefit from these investments will be the ones who pay for them. And so this talk about everybody paying for California's crazy experiments is not true. Cost allocation should take care of that. And if we want to be bold and maybe over-exuberant, that's our cost to bear, and that's fair. But it simply ensures that regions, states, and utilities take all relevant facts into account when planning ahead. There were some good reforms left on the cutting room floor. For example, FERC has never used its backstop authority for national interest transmission, which you updated in Order 1977, because it requires unnecessary and duplicative environmental reviews at FERC and DOE, and that takes legislation to fix. We should fix it. FERC also declined to start environmental reviews for qualifying lines concurrent with state reviews. And there's no reason you should have to wait for a state to finish its review and deny the permit, or for a state to sit on an application for a year. These and other inefficiencies add time and cost to proposed lines, on top of how hard it already is to permit large linear infrastructure like transmission and pipelines. Our Speed and Reliability Act would correct these inefficiencies and cut at least 5 years from the existing siting and permitting process for high-impact transmission lines. And I'm thrilled that it's now bipartisan, and I thank Representatives Garbarino and Curtis for supporting this common-sense policy. I was also excited to see the core components of this bill and my Big Wires Act included in the bipartisan Senate permitting deal. Permitting reform is not dead. We got a great start from the Senate. We got some work to do here to keep it bipartisan and to pass it through. So I invite all members of the committee to support these bills and join me in finding other ways to make permitting work smarter. Chairman Phillips, now that you've pushed out a strong rule on regional planning, I want to turn attention to the interregional transmission planning. The Fiscal Responsibility Act directed NERC to complete a study on the benefits that interregional transmission would bring to reliability. It's clear to me, however, that the benefits of interregional transmission and potential minimum transfer requirements have already been well documented. In your view, does the Commission need to wait for the results of that study to move forward on a potential rulemaking on interregional transmission or minimum transfer requirements?
No, and we are not waiting. I've directed our staff to continue with our proceeding. In parallel, NERC will deliver their study. At the end of the year, we'll pick up the ball, carry it to the finish line.
Great. And existing interregional transmission planning, to say the least, is not living up to its full potential. It's clear that more we can do to ensure regions are working collaboratively to maximize reliability and minimize costs, particularly through finding a balance between new transmission, new generation, and innovation. Chairman Phillips, could a rulemaking on minimum transfer requirements, which would ensure that regions can transfer a certain amount of energy among each other, reduce customer costs, and improve reliability, and how would that work?
I completely agree with the benefits of interregional. It is the next step on our transmission reform journey. We're turning to that now, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to determine what is the best course of action to address it. But it is critically important to the reliability of our system.
I want to just thank you finally for giving you the assurance about Order 1920 not providing new authority to allocate costs of transmission. We have been up against this allegation that other states are going to pay for each other and without respect to benefit. That's not the case. I appreciate your assurance on that and hope we can use that information to move forward. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Peters. Now, we're going to do one more Republican, and then we're going to recess. They've called votes on the floor. Chairman Griffiths recognized for 5 minutes.
All right, Commissioner Christie, February 18th, 2000, you're giving me advice and counsel on the floor of the Virginia House of Delegates. I've been taking your advice for more than a quarter of a century. Give me advice on the cost allocation for electric transmission lines that was referenced in your previous comments and in Order 1920.
First, you've never filed a malpractice claim, so I take that as the advice must have been.
I did note that we also both had a lot more hair.
At least, the advice was at least not actionable, and you're right about the hair. Let me address this thing about the cost allocation, because I've heard this repeatedly, the sound bites about, well, no one's going to be forced to pay for somebody else's policy. Clearly, Congressman Peters, in California, that's not the case. I don't know who said that. California is in your own ISO, and New York is in its own ISO. So the issue is not in the single state ISOs. No one's going to pay for California's policies or New York's because you're in a single state ISO. The problem is in the multi-state RTOs. And I spent 17 years as a Virginia regulator in PJM. And it absolutely will result in the socialization of public policy costs from one state to others. And here's how it will do that. First of all, Order 1000 said that you can cost allocate public policy projects separately from reliability projects. This rule says, no, you cannot. That is a major radical change from Order 1000. So it didn't build on Order 1000. It has a radical break from Order 1000. Now, that was important because then what the rule says is we're going to throw public policy projects into the same bucket with reliability projects. And then we're going to mandate one cost allocation formula for all those projects. Now, the thing about the benefits and this soundbite that, well, no one's going to pay that for the benefits they don't get, there's no transparency. What the rule says is, first it mandates, and states have no ability to approve this or not approve it. It mandates a list of factors that have to be used in the planning of the projects that get into the regional plan where the money starts to flow. And among those factors that are mandated are state mandatory renewable portfolio standards. So it is mandating state public policies be used in the planning. On the other end of the process, it mandates benefits. And by mandating benefits, and again, states have no ability to say yes or no, or we don't agree, or we with these mandated benefits. What the mandated benefits do is there's a disconnect between the factors and the benefits, which is going to have the inevitable result of spreading the costs of public policy projects, which are mandated at the front end in the planning factors. It is going to spread the costs across multiple states in the multi-state regions. Again, it's not a problem in California. It's not a problem in New York. It is the problem in the multi-state regions like PJM. And my position was, in the NOPR, if you want to include public policy projects with reliability projects in the same bucket, which Order 1000 did not require, then I think that the states, the policymakers or regulators, ought to have the authority on the public policy part to say whether they agree with the cost allocation or not. Not to veto, and not to say dictate a cost allocation, but the states ought to have the ability to say, okay, if we're going to throw these in one bucket, which Order 1000 did not do, then the states have got to have the ability to say, is this good for our consumers? This whole thing is about really, again, I get back to my original point. State regulators are the front line and the last line of defense for their consumers.
All right, and I get that, and you did a great job of explaining it, and I appreciate it. And let me break it into terms that I can understand. So when Dominion Power builds their plant in St. Paul, you were on the State Corporation Commission, that plant was built in APCO territory, Appalachian Power territory, as opposed to Virginia Power territory. The customers in Wise and Russell and in APCO territory in Southwest Virginia didn't have to pay for Richmond to have power, did they?
No, they didn't, because as a customer of Dominion, which I am and still am, we paid for the network upgrades to interconnect that plant. So, but the cost stayed within Virginia. That's the important point. And in PJM has been doing a good job of planning reliability lines for the entire 17 years I was there. Those reliability lines are cost allocated according to a formula across of all PJM, and everybody pays in PJM, and no one really complains across the whole 13-state region about the cost allocation for the reliability projects, because we are getting benefits from those. What this rule does, and it's a fundamental break from Order 1000 and the construct we had before, is it says, we're now going to make you pay for public policy projects because we're going to hide them in this bucket with the reliability projects, and then we're going to mandate an ex-ante, what's called an ex-ante cost allocation, and whether the states agree or not. And the states can even agree on a different formula, and the rule says the transmission provider can just ignore it. So I don't think that's fair, quite frankly. And again, if you separated out the public policy projects, which is the way it's been done in PJM for the last decade, and let me say one more thing. PJM is a good example, okay?
Got it. Time's up.
Okay, well.
Hopefully somebody else will give you another chance. I appreciate your wise counsel as always, and I yield back.
Okay.
Gentleman yields back. We're now going to stand in recess until probably around 11:15, but it'll be within 10 minutes of the last vote being called, so the committee will stand in recess. Have to make sure the staff apparatus is all in place too. Okay. All right, I'm gonna call the subcommittee back to order. Appreciate your patience on the vote series there. And we'll now recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Fletcher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan, and thanks to you and Ranking Member DeGette for organizing today's hearing. Thank you to Chairman Phillips and all of the commissioners for being here today and taking the time to testify. FERC is at its best when it has a full complement of 5 commissioners, and I'm glad that we have a full commission before us today. FERC's work is vital to ensuring that every American has access to reliable and affordable energy through the projects it authorizes. And its work is particularly important to the people that I represent in Houston, which, as we all know, is the energy capital of the world. I've heard from many of them that many times over the last year in particular, items on FERC's docket have taken longer to be processed than in the past. And I'm sure that you know that companies rely on their expected timelines when negotiating with their customers, and that the uncertainty around permitting, which has a lot of layers and a lot of challenges, but uncertainties in the permitting and tariff approval process can otherwise create issues delivering reliable and affordable energy to consumers. So it's with that in mind, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to direct a few questions to you first. First of all, in your view, does FERC have the necessary budgetary resources to meet expected timelines in processing matters on its docket?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I do believe that we have the resources that we need. We have outstanding staff. I think we have the best staff in all of government, present company excluded, of course. And to be clear, but we do know that we have the industry that poach our staff because they're so good. So to the extent that Congress can provide resources so that we could have salaries that are equal to those of industry, that would be very welcome.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you anticipated my second question that I was going to ask you about whether you needed additional hiring authority for certain positions, as well as whether you needed additional funding to have competitive salary commensurate with private industry, because I know it is hard to attract and retain the talented technical staff that you need to and get the sufficient amount of expertise. So in addition to funding for salaries, is there anything else that you might need us to be other authorities that you might need us to provide?
We are ready, willing, and able to implement, and I defer to Congress when it comes to any changes to our statutory authority. What I ask is this, is that to the extent that you ask us to do something new, that you be clear, because we know that FERC is one of the most litigated agencies in all of government, and I think that's critically important.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I want to turn quickly to a question about the recently released Equity Action Plan to address environmental justice concerns in the pipeline certification and siting process. In my view, increased community involvement and engagement early in the process and a directed outreach program is going to provide a greater opportunity for community input into the permitting and siting process and really make it possible to lay a solid foundation for future decisions and allow projects to move forward. Mr. Chairman, can you tell us when FERC plans to publish the external guidance for the EAP infrastructure proceedings?
So environmental justice, I issued 3 top priorities when I first was named chairman. Environmental justice was one of them. I'm extremely proud of the record that we've had. We've had the first ever roundtable. We established a working group within our OGC focused on environmental justice. We selected a new environmental justice senior counsel, and we continue to do work. We're working on outward-facing public guidance on environmental justice, and I expect to issue that in the very near future.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I think we're all looking forward to seeing that, and I do think it's important to engage communities, and I think that there's a great opportunity to help bring people together early in the process and be able to move projects that are critical forward. And before I yield back my time, I want to say something about this and some of the things we've talked about this morning, because in Texas, we are no strangers to the reliability challenges that each of you have talked about this morning and that you addressed in your testimony, especially as the result of extreme weather events. And I appreciate your acknowledgement of Winter Storm Uri, Chairman Phillips, and also Commissioner Christie, as well as your, I think, very clear explanation of the supply and demand challenges that are in front of us and some of the drivers of those challenges. And I don't say this lightly, but I do want everyone here to remember that as we do this work, during Winter Storm Uri in Texas, less than an hour from where I live, Americans froze to death inside their own homes when the power went out. The things that we're talking about here are issues of life and death, and they're critically important. So I thank you for your work, and Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your work on this committee. It's really important that we get this right and that we work together to get it done. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you so much. Now go to Mr. Wahlberg from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel for being here. It's great to have all the commissioners in front of us and a full group. The Environmental Protection Agency's finalized greenhouse gas emission standards on fossil fuel generators require existing coal-fired power plants planning to operate past 2039 and new or substantially modified natural gas plants that generate at least 40% of their maximum annual capacity to capture 90% of their carbon dioxide emissions by 2032. This requirement will impose billions of dollars of requirements on generators and other entities to construct carbon capture systems, build out CO2 pipelines, and permit sequestration sites. Companies will not pursue these technologies, I believe, if they are a cost that cannot be recovered. And so, Commissioners Rosner, Chang, and C, in your opinions, will the costs of carbon capture facilities and associated infrastructure be borne by taxpayers?
Thank you for the question. Here's where I'll start. There's strength in diversity, and we saw that in the last couple of winters where we had winter storms where if we didn't have all the resources on the system running, we would have had greater problems than we had. So I'm an all-of-the-above person. I think it's essential. To your question about the specific cost of those facilities, that's something that I would have to get back to you. But as a general matter, I think we need them all. Thank you.
Commissioner C, will it be borne by taxpayers, the cost?
I agree these are also very important issues when we're looking at both what it takes to power the nation today and looking at promising technology in the future. I think when we look at these rules in particular, there's a lot of areas of potential concern when we see the consequences that they may have when we're looking at the whole regulatory landscape on the existing power sources that we have. This is an important issue, one that I'm committed to looking at closely to the extent that it affects FERC's jurisdiction and working closely with my colleagues on.
Mr. Chang, will the cost be borne by ratepayers?
Yes, thank you for your question. This is a great concern regarding both the cost and the reliability of the system. And I'm beginning to look into the potential implications of some of the rules that you had just mentioned. And I look forward to having an opportunity to work with my colleagues to really dive in to understand the near-term and longer-term implications. Thank you.
I thought it was a simple question. As a follow-up, many existing generators will likely close their operations because of the EPA's rule. New generation sources are unlikely to be in the footprint of existing generators. As new members of the Commission, do you believe it is just, reasonable, and not unduly discriminatory or preferential for ratepayers to bear the transmission rates that will be required because of this forced generation shift? I strongly believe. Commissioner Rosner?
Well, thank you for the question, sir. And here's what I think. I think that, you know, I'm a yes and. I think we need everything we have today. That's quite clear. And I think we need some new things. And I think when we build new things, we need to make sure that we're building the least cost set of resources and that we're compensating those resources in response to the services that they actually provide. Thank you.
In my role as a new commissioner, I'm looking very closely at costs when it comes to the Commission's authority for just and reasonable rates. I think these are important factors to take into account. I certainly have respect for other agencies and their responsibilities, but as an energy regulator, I think it is important to look at consequences for reliability and otherwise for some of these rules that you're talking about. And that's something that I think is important for us as commissioners to continue to look closely at for all of the reasons you mentioned and others.
Mr. Chang?
Thank you for the question. I take the economics of these energy systems, including generation and transmission, very seriously. Historically, we've built in this country generation and then transmission to bring the power from generation to very nearby load centers. And as the resources shift, we, FERC, and really the industry need to look at essentially the platform and the network that's needed to support the generation that we need, not just today, but into the future. Thank you.
Well, I agree with all of that, but I think there is an answer that was missing here for ratepayers. And I have another question for Commissioner Christie, but I'll submit that in concern about the idea of a shell game that's going on. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I'll submit that question later.
Chairman yields back. I'll now go to Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Duncan. It is wonderful to see a full complement at FERC, and I congratulate and welcome the newly sworn-in commissioners, so thank you for your service. I would also like to recognize and thank Chair Phillips for his leadership on Order 1920. Much appreciated. Having better longer-term planning of our transmission system at a time of tremendous change and evolving risks to our electric infrastructure is common sense. It should not surprise anyone that groups from across the political spectrum have praised this order, including Republican former Chair Chatterjee. This is a reasonable approach, I believe, that will undoubtedly result in a more reliable and affordable electricity system. So again, I thank you, Chair Phillips. We know there are many different tools to improve the reliability and affordability of our grid, including getting better performance out of our existing infrastructure through the adoption of cost-effective grid-enhancing technologies and advanced reconductoring. So, Mr. Chair, why was it important that Order 1920 requires grid planners to consider these types of alternatives to new transmission?
Thank you so much for the question. We require, in Order number 1920, that grid planners consider grid-enhancing technologies. And this is why it's so important. It's because we know we can't just build our way to where we need to go. So it's going to provide more reliability sooner and lower costs for customers, because when you talk about things like advanced reconductoring, actually replacing the lines, the wires within an existing transmission facility, you can save up to 60% of efficiency and just as much when it comes to cost. It's critically important.
Thank you. These technologies are continuing to improve, as we all know. New innovations are becoming commercially available, and I would encourage the Commission and grid planners to continue to update their understanding of these technologies so that the most beneficial, cost-effective options are properly considered. I also want to ask about FERC's workforce. Yesterday, we had a hearing with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the NRC's acknowledged that a significant portion of its workforce is eligible for retirement. And I know that you had answered some of the questions of my colleague, Congresswoman Fletcher. But Chair Phillips, we know that FERC is consistently rated as a top place to work in the federal government. But does FERC also have these same retirement risks? And can you give us a sense of the long-term plan to maintain that robust workforce that we require?
Thank you. We have an outstanding workforce. As I said, we are consistently rated as one of the best places to work in government. I believe we have a great culture at FERC. We do have a lot of our senior leaders that are at or near retirement. And even beyond that, I get emails every week, every other week of someone who's critical to our mission, who's been taking a job somewhere else. This is something that we need to continue to focus on.
Well, it's an arena that is under transformation, so it makes it even more exciting and compelling to establish a work career there. In recent years at NRC, there have been major efforts supported by broader hiring authorities to reduce the percentage of employees eligible for retirement by recruiting that next generation of NRC staff. Now, I know that in the exchange with Congresswoman Fletcher, You talked about making it, responded to the ease by which you can recruit that staff. But what about competitive compensation? When we look at some of these issues, obviously we want the best that we can get at a time of, again, transformation and perhaps more reliance on FERC as an authority. But what about that competitive compensation?
It is a huge issue that we have. We know that our staff is recognized as the best. There are companies out there that are constantly looking to approach them, to bring them inside their organizations, and they're willing to pay them more than we could ever pay. And a lot of staff at FERC, they don't do it for the pay. Let me be honest. They do it because they want to support the mission. But to be clear, it helps us to retain the staff we need if we can pay them competitively.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do not believe it matters whether you care about transmission, electricity markets, hydropower, or pipelines. We should all want FERC as an entity to have the personnel necessary to carry out its responsibilities. We're in a critical stage of energy innovation. So if there are barriers for FERC to hire and adequately compensate scientific and technical and engineering, legal, and other specialized roles, we should try to address them as has been done with NRC. And so stand ready to assist in that effort. And with that, I thank you all. And Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now go to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Phillips, as you probably know, I represent a significant portion of the LNG export industry with Freeport LNG. We have 7 ports, upper Gulf Coast of Texas, 1/3 of the Gulf Coast. Freeport LNG, Golden Pass, Port Arthur LNG, as well as many of the employees of Cheniere Energy over in Louisiana, that other foreign country, which is just across the Sabine Neches. However, we're concerned about FERC's overlapping, duplicative, and sometimes conflicting requirements with other agencies. I hear from our LNG people, our energy people all the time, and it's extremely important. For example, FERC appears to be asking operators to implement additional emergency response measures along the waterway that go way beyond what's actually required. Now, we're talking about waterway. We're talking about exporting LNG out from the Gulf Coast. That's actually required by the Coast Guard. And they do a jam-up job of actually making sure that we export LNG safely, cleanly, responsibly. So FERC also requires semi-annual operations reports, which ask for exactly, much of it is the same information in PHMSA's required annual operations report. Earlier this year, I authored a bipartisan bill requiring FERC, PHMSA, and the Coast Guard to produce additional memorandums of understanding. Let's get this tied together, seeking to mitigate regulatory overlap and duplication, so that there's not quite so much paperwork involved. I don't know if you're aware of that. So my question is, how is FERC coordinating with those other agencies to reduce that regulatory overlap? And would you support that proposal, my proposal, for FERC, PHMSA, and Coast Guard to produce additional interagency agreements to address duplicative and conflicting agency requirements? Does that sound like it could save some man-hours, some effort, and some money?
I will say this, we have been focused at FERC on bringing down the timelines to actually permit infrastructure that we know we need. When it comes to working with our sister agencies, this is something that we do on a staff level all the time. Are there opportunities for improvement? Absolutely. I haven't had a chance to review the legislation that you're talking about, but I would be able to provide technical assistance, and I'll make my staff available to you, sir.
Well, we want you to do more than just look into it. We want you to, of course, act, because it's important. And so I appreciate your response there. I'll go to all the rest of the commissioners here with my second question. Despite the Biden administration's acknowledgement of the importance of natural gas in supporting global energy security, DOE announced a ban on LNG exports. Y'all are aware of that. This pause impacts United States Energy's infrastructure development, especially in my district along the Gulf Coast, where we produce 65% of the nation's jet fuel, 80% of the nation's military-grade fuel, and 3 LNG plants, and We actually got Port Arthur LNG, which is on the drawing board, if you will. They have phase one, now they want to go phase two. All of a sudden, they have a big red flag, stop sign. And so earlier this month, a federal court in Louisiana granted a request, as y'all probably know, from 16 states to stay DOE's ban effective immediately. Simple yes or no questions. I'll start down here with Commissioner Chang. Does the U.S. have a fundamental interest to advance needed infrastructure to match our country's abundant natural gas supply with international demand? It's a yes or no.
Thank you for that question. I do think U.S. has a critical role to play in international and global energy issues, including the
So yes, the U.S. has a
export of
fundamental
LNG.
interest. Commissioner C?
Yes, matching infrastructure with demand is important.
Okay.
Yes.
And we don't want to be the minority down here. Commissioner Christie?
Yes, and if I could add to something to your earlier question, this chairman's done a great job on handling Section 3 and Section 7 applications under the Natural Gas Act. He has shown tremendous leadership.
Don't tell him that. He's going to want to raise.
Well, that's up to you all.
Yeah.
For the rest of us too, by the way. But he has done an absolutely fantastic job in moving these applications.
We're running out of time. I got to get to him.
Okay.
First of all, I want to thank my friend, Commissioner Christie, for what he said. And the answer to your question is yes.
Thank you. Yes or no, do domestic LNG facilities bolster international energy supply that is competitive, accessible, and environmentally friendly? I'm down to 7 minutes. I think y'all would agree. And my last one is, does U.S. LNG export capacity afford our nation a competitive advantages? I think so. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Jim yields back, and now go to Ms. Custer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to dive right in. We all know that hydropower and pump storage are critical to our clean energy future. And I want to ask a few questions that I asked Secretary Granholm when she came before this committee in May. First, do you agree, and this will just go right down the line, that hydropower is a key part of our clean energy system?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
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 Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. Should Congress work to ensure that the relicensing process is, not driving reliable, dispatchable, clean energy projects offline?
Yes.
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 Thank you very much. And do you think it's prudent for Congress to empower FERC to work with agencies and stakeholders in the relicensing process to resolve inconsistent or conflicting licensing terms?
Yes.
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 Thank you very much. All right, Commissioner Christie, this next question is for you. In the Western Navajo Pump Storage 1 and 2 order, FERC denied an application for a preliminary project for 2 new pump storage facilities that had not adequately consulted with the tribe on whose reservation the projects would be sited. Should Congress do more to ensure that tribal consent in the FERC hydropower licensing process?
I think that's for the chairman.
That's for you.
Sorry.
No worries.
Thank you so much. We take very serious our trust responsibility when it comes to our tribal nations. What we did when we issued that rejection for the preliminary permit is consistent with what we've done with other federal land managers for over a decade. This doesn't close the door. We can still have our applicants come back with a full application. And to be clear, I don't think this is going to slow down the process at all. But we have to do more when it comes to our relationship with our tribal nations.
Great, thank you. Commissioner C, do you agree with Commissioner Christie? Congress should do more to ensure tribal consent in the hydropower licensing process?
I think the tribe's voice is critical in these processes. I think it's very important to receive that input, and that's something that's very important to me as I am getting up to speed and learning this new position. I certainly welcome any additional clarification or direction from Congress and would be committed to working to implement that as well.
Great, thank you so much. Moving on, in New England, there are many small 100-plus-year-old hydropower facilities that may have outlived their useful life. It may be more economical for those asset owners to surrender their licenses than operate the facilities that are potentially hazardous to the community and no longer profitable. Should FERC consider ways to make it easier for obsolete facilities to make end-of-life decisions?
Yes, absolutely. When we know that we have a decreasing number of these requests regarding small hydro, they are critically important, but we should find ways to streamline our processes for these facilities.
Great, thank you very much. It's clear that Congress and the administration agree on many issues, and I look forward to working with FERC and my colleagues on this committee to get a bipartisan hydropower licensing reform bill signed into law. That's something that's been a priority for me. Last, I want to mention one of our power producers in New England. This is called Great River Hydro, is working with you on certification of incremental hydropower generation for production tax credits. I know our staffs have been in touch on the issue, and I look forward to working with you and Great River Hydro to ensure that we're able to continue to grow our renewable energy portfolio in New England. All right, 1 minute. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Natural Gas Act. While the Federal Power Act allows FERC to order refunds when it determines utilities are overcharging for electricity, the Natural Gas Act does not allow the same refunds when companies are caught overcharging for natural gas, meaning large interstate pipelines can over-recover billions of dollars in excessive rates that should be flowing back to everyday Americans. We are very focused on lowering costs for everyday Americans. Chairman Phillips, does this lack of refund authority impact the energy rates that Americans pay? And if Congress granted FERC the authority to issue refunds, would FERC exercise this authority to protect consumers and keep prices just and reasonable?
Affordability is a top priority. It is always top of mind. I have a personal relationship growing up with, before energy poverty was a term. To be clear, we defer to Congress in their judgment on what to do with regard to refunds. I think accountability is important. If Congress gives us that authority, we will faithfully execute it.
Great, thank you. And I'll just close by saying I'm proud that in this Congress, Senators Hyde, Smith, and Blumenthal are leading a charge to solve the problem, and I'm very supportive of the Making Pipeline Accountable to Consumers and Taxpayers Act. Both the Industrial Energy Consumers of America and the American Public Gas Association have written to the committee using it to fix this issue, and I'll insert their letters in the record. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I'll now go to Utah's Mr. Curtis, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. FERC's stated mission is to assist consumers in obtaining reliable, safe, secure, and economically efficient energy at a reasonable cost. That's awesome. I like to simplify that a little bit to we need affordable, reliable, clean energy. And I think the market's actually driving that, in my opinion, actually quicker than government is. And those three things will be paramount as we move forward. To get there, we all know we need to innovate. We need to find abundant, affordable, reliable, clean energy sources. And this is becoming increasingly challenging. In Utah, we have a data center, AI data center that wants to come in, and they're asking for 1.5 gigawatt of energy 24/7 with backup. And my local utility likes to remind them it took them 100 years to get 1 gigawatt for Wyoming. And these are the challenges, right, that we face and that we're looking for. And I think it's important that we're clear, like we don't want to hamper this growth, and we want to figure out how to do that, and we need more energy. One of the ways that has been suggested to do this is co-locating facilities. And I think more and more I hear people talking about, a small nuclear reactor next to a data center. And Commissioner Christie, I'd like to ask you about particularly, there are differences in co-locating. Some could work and some couldn't. And I don't know if you've read an article by Michael Cormus that I'd like to submit for the record on the topic. Do you have any thoughts on this, when it's good, when it's bad, and how we can make this work?
I do have thoughts, Congressman, but we have a pending case that is a really big case, and it is pending right now. And so to give you my thoughts, I'm afraid somebody would accuse me of prejudging it, but that is a humongous issue, the issue of co-location. And
I'm at a loss because I've never had a witness give as good a reason not to answer my question as you just gave me.
I'm afraid I have to, because that case is a huge case. It comes out of PJM, and it's one we're going to have to act on. And there's no way I can even talk generically about the issue of co-location without.
All right, I'd love to just put down a marker. This is a conversation we need to have, right? And
I agree with you on that.
And hopefully we can do that forward and find answers to some of these difficult questions. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit that Cormos report for the record. Well, in the little bit of time I have, I want to talk about, we get it, permitting for new transmission is just incredibly difficult and slow. So that puts an added emphasis on making our current transmission more productive, more efficient. And there's technology such as advanced conductors that can double capacity. I'm curious if anybody would like to comment on that or what we're doing, FERC's doing to try to, Chairman, you're ready to jump in on that. I'd love to have your comments on that.
I love to talk about grid enhancing technology, sir. Both in our order number 2023, which is our interconnection queue reform order, as well as order number 1920, we require our transmission providers to consider grid enhancing technologies like advanced reconductoring, both in an interconnection process and in the planning phase for new transmission. We know that we can't build our way to where we need to go. We have to get as much as we can out of the existing system.
That's very good. Good. Yes, Commissioner Christie.
I would just say, Congressman, grid-enhancing technologies, speaking generically, have tremendous potential. What I've been told by engineers in the field is there are, and of course there's a whole array of what are now called GETs, that's their acronym. So you can't even really talk about too generically. But what engineers have told me is there are times they work and times they don't. There are places they work and places they don't. And so what's important is when you deploy GETs, and again, you're going to charge consumers for the cost. So number one, both from a consumer cost standpoint and from a reliability standpoint, we have to make sure that the deployment at the times and the places are driven by engineering decisions so that we're using them where and when they work, and you're not sticking consumers with the cost just to buy something that may not work a large part of the time. So it's a decision that needs to be driven by engineers.
So I think that's fair. I'd also like to point out, thank you for not just assuming because they don't work in some instances that we shouldn't allow them. And I'd love the ingenuity and the incentive being on, let's find answers. Let's get to a yes, if that makes sense. So thank you very much. I yield my time, Chairman.
Chairman yields back. I'll now go to Dr. Schreier for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners, for being here today. And a special welcome to our 3 new commissioners. In May, the Pacific Northwest Utilities Conference Committee released its annual 10-year forecast for the region, which anticipates a massive surge in demand that outpaces even previous projections, as we've heard from several of my colleagues today. Much of this is attributed to high-tech manufacturing growth, data center expansion, and the trend toward electrification, which is especially quick in Washington state. Other regional power planners in the public sector have seen this similar trend, and if we're going to meet the energy needs for decades to come, we need to build out transmission for new generation to come online and make the existing grid more flexible and make it easier for surplus energy in one area to be transferred to areas with the highest demand at any given time. The FERC Commission rule in discussion today provides a fantastic framework for each region to make that happen. Chair Phillips, as you know, transmission planning in the Pacific Northwest is a pretty unique effort taken up by many different entities and stakeholders, including public utility districts and privately owned utilities, and then unusual and giant federal agencies like the Bonneville Power Administration. So only some of these entities are actually FERC regulated, which has implications for the transmission rule and other FERC orders. So my question is, how are you balancing your approach to ensure that both areas under your jurisdiction and non-jurisdictional entities can coordinate efficiently, especially in Washington state, where these 2 states could be right side by side and need to interconnect themselves?
So when it comes to our non-FERC jurisdictional utilities across the country, we meet with them. I meet with their leadership as often as I can. I've met with the leadership of Bonneville. We talk to them. We know they're facing the same issues that other utilities are around the country. We also have time. When you think about order number 1920, there's a state consultation period that's required by transmission providers. States can save and allow time to actually engage with folks like Bonneville as well when it comes to how we're gonna select and how we're gonna pay for the transmission we need.
So this is good to hear, because I just want to make sure that every consumer, ratepayer in Washington State and beyond has the benefits of having this interconnection. Now, on a related topic, earlier, my colleague, Representative Peters, has already discussed how important progress on interregional transmission is. And as Commissioner Chang, you noted, with extremely and increasingly common extreme weather events that cause frequent outages, we're going to require this flexible grid that can transfer adequate power from other areas quickly. One way to increase that capacity between different regions is to connect transmission between regions, particularly by building out the interties between the Northwest and the Southwest and the Eastern and Western. So we focus a lot on the Eastern Western. I was wondering if you could comment about maybe what FERC could do to encourage Northwest and Southwest.
Is this a question for me? I'm so sorry.
It is a question for you, unless you feel like somebody else is more capable of
No.
in that lane.
No, I'm glad. You know, it's really what is at the heart of what we've done with order number 1920. You know, we've established the framework to allow the resources that we know need to be connected to where the people are. And this is why we're planning for the long term, so that we can identify the best and the most cost-effective solutions to address the transmission needs up and down the scale.
Thank you. I look forward to more emphasis on connecting these regions and the ability to really have that flexibility, at the drop of a hat, to be able to get energy where it's needed, when it's needed. Thank you. I yield back.
John Lee yields back. I now go to Mr. Allen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Duncan, for holding this hearing with the Federal Regulatory Commission. I want to thank the commissioners for being here today. Obviously, we're talking about ensuring reliable and affordable energy. It's critical, and I'm glad to have this opportunity to discuss how this impacts my home state of Georgia. My district is home to Plant Vogtle, which I guess this committee is going to get tired of me talking about, but we're very proud of the fact that we've just completed the first new nuclear power plants built in over 30 years in the United States. Units 3 and 4 are now in commercial operation, bringing reliable, affordable power to Georgians for decades to come. Commissioner Christie, last year we discussed the positive and negatives of vertically integrated markets, regional transmission organizations, and independent system operators. One benefit of a vertically integrated structure is that if the State Public Service Commission values reliability, then utilities must adhere to the priority placed on reliability. I am concerned that EPA's suite of regulations such as the Clean Power Plan 2.0, revised particulate matter standard, interstate transport rule for ozone, coal ash regulations, and others will result in reliable sources of energy being pushed off the grid. Should public service commissions that highly value reliable services of energy in vertically integrated markets be concerned about forced retirements and the ability of utilities to provide firm generation?
They should, and they are. I've talked to a lot of regulators in your region, and they are extremely concerned about the cost of the EPA power plant rule on the generating resources that they need to keep the lights on in Georgia and your neighboring states in the South. You know, you're primarily IRP vertically integrated states. You're not in an RTO. What that means is a lot of those generating units that you depend on, especially coal, gas, and nuclear, are in what's called rate base. And your consumers are paying the cost of those units. And so if EPA comes out with a rule that it puts state regulators, really, it gives them a Hobson's choice. You can approve a huge compliance cost for needed generation, and it's going to be passed through dollar for dollar, plus what we call an ROE, a profit, to your consumers. or the regulators have to say, well, we can't pass these humongous costs on to consumers, so we're going to have to say no to the cost recovery, and then they're going to shut the generating unit down. And you have a lot of southern co-op members. You have a lot of electric co-ops serving rural South. Co-ops, of course, are not owned by stockholders. Co-ops are owned by the very members who are both consumers and members. And the National Electric Co-op Association for the Rural Electric Co-op Association has been very vocal that they can't ask their members, who are already hard-pressed to pay their bills, to pay the compliance costs for the power plant rule. And so they're really between a rock and a hard place. They're having to either consider shutting down the generating units they need for reliability or pass through these huge costs to their own members. So yes, and they're very aware of that, Congressman, both your regulators and the people who run your electric co-ops.
What options do state public service commissions have in vertically integrated markets, and if the government steps in and shuts down reliable generators without an adequate supply of firm generation to replace it?
Well, again, they're facing a Hobson's choice, because if they allow the compliance costs to go through to keep those plants open, that's going to cause tremendous rate increases to their consumers. So as a regulator who did this for 17 years, you don't want to do that.
Right.
But on the other hand, you're talking about the generating units that your integrated resource plan shows are essential to keeping your lights on. So really, you're giving them a hell of a choice. Keep the lights on or burden your consumers with costs that they can't pay. So it's a terrible choice.
Yeah. Well, FERC recently finalized which we talked about, the Order 1920, and I've just got about 30 seconds left. And we've heard from our colleagues about a letter from 32 state public utility commissioners supporting the rule. They assert that this letter shows support for FERC's actions. As Chair Duncan noted, 238 state utility commissions across the country, just 32 have signed the letter. Most are from locations that have carbon-free electricity and net zero economy goals. And I will submit this for the record since I'm out of time. In my opinion, this letter just confirms the Republican argument that Order 1920 is designed to facilitate expensive electricity transmission projects while socializing the cost onto ratepayers from states without the same policy goals. So if you would respond to me in writing on that, I would appreciate it, because I'm out of time. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now go to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castro, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our FERC commissioners, Mr. Chairman, and a special welcome to our new commissioners. I look forward to working with you all. I think under the leadership of Chair Phillips, the FERC has done a very good job with a focus on making energy reliable and affordable for American families and businesses. And special kudos for Order 1920 that requires the regional grid operators to engage in long-term regional planning for the first time. Who would be against long-term planning in this ever-changing world now, especially with the predictions for energy usage going up, energy demand because of a booming economy and new data centers and electrification across the economy, and then these increasingly costly and more frequent extreme weather events. It is very important that all energy producers and the RTOs think about planning for the long term. And you all should know, yesterday there was an amendment offered to the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill to not fund implementation of Order 1920, and it failed here in the House. So for what that's worth, I think that's a good sign going forward. But the job of FERC is not over. We've got to do more to deploy low-cost grid-enhancing technologies. That I'm glad to hear how enthusiastic you are, Mr. Chairman, and clear up the interconnection backlogs. There are 2,600 gigawatts of generation and storage capacity currently seeking connection to the grid, often with wait times of 5 years or more. These wait times are driving up costs for consumers, for ratepayers, and present an immense challenge to the grid in the era of rising energy demand. Order 2023, the interconnection order, was a strong first step, but we need additional action. So Chair Phillips, what what else are you doing to improve interconnection times and alleviate the backlog?
Thank you so much, and thank you for your comments. We are focused on interconnection. We had order number 2023, which I think is a great first step, but we're not done. We have more work to do on interconnection. We're gonna have a workshop this fall in September where we're gonna focus on automation, using artificial intelligence and other ways to continue to bring those unacceptable wait times down that you mentioned, Congressman.
So for our new commissioners, you have a fresh perspective here. Commissioner Rosner, what have you been giving thought to identifying, promoting queue management best practices, such as advanced computing and automation and standardized study criteria?
Well, thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I'm looking forward to the technical conference that Chairman Phillips has noticed for September. I look forward to engaging with participants there, with the record that's developed there, and with my colleagues to see if there are solutions. In general, I think about GETS and all these ways to unlock more efficiency. If there's ways to unlock efficiency in the process by doing more with less, that is just common sense, and I'd be interested in pursuing that. So thank you for the question.
And Commissioner C, how about speeding up interconnection queues? What interests you? What do you anticipate looking ahead?
I think this is certainly an important issue. I'm really looking forward to diving in that more, especially as I'm getting started in this role. I think it's important to look at where we're at today and where we're going in the future and looking at all of the different pieces that go into that puzzle. So I agree that that's a very important issue and one that I'm looking forward to looking at in a lot more depth as I get started.
So Commissioner Chang, you also have experience. What has worked that you see could bring some benefits to tackling this interconnection queue problem in the backlog?
Thank you very much for your question. One thought I have on this is that different region, and I fully very much respect regional differences across the country. Different regions have different and unique needs and priorities. And when it comes to interconnecting new resources, some regions also might have differences in the way they analyze them and approach, but accelerating and streamlining the interconnecting resources is paramount and is very important. And I also just want to add, using advanced technology is really the way we move forward and we lead in the world of new technologies. So that includes some of the newer technologies on transmission system, but also any kind of assistance that artificial intelligence and other sort of technological solution would bring to interconnection approaches. I think I welcome those opportunities to hear that from industry, but also to work with my colleagues to engage in that. Thank you.
I look forward to your work here, and I yield. Thank you.
Julie yields back, and I'll go to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Balderson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all. Congratulations to those that have joined FERC, and I look forward to working with you. I want to direct my first question to Commissioner Christie and Commissioner C. Last month, I held an energy roundtable event at a nearly 2,000 megawatt natural gas-fired plant in Guernsey County, Ohio, right in the middle of Ohio's 12th congressional district. The roundtable featured local co-ops, utilities, independent power producers, manufacturing and business groups, and natural gas producers. The overwhelming message from the roundtable participants was that, one, our baseload generation is retiring too quickly, largely due to federal and state policies. Number two, power demand is rising at historic levels. And three, we need more natural gas transportation infrastructure. Commissioner C and Christie, would you generally agree with this assessment? And ladies first, Mrs. C.
I do. I think these are very important issues. Certainly it is the states who have primary responsibility when it comes to generation, but I think when we're looking at reliability concerns, it's very important to look at all those pieces. Stressors on the supply side and certainly increased demand. So I think those are very important issues.
Thank you. Commissioner Christie.
Congressman, in my opening statement, I made the point that last week when PJM peaked in the heat wave, 46% of the generation in PJM to meet that peak was gas. And the generating unit that you had your forum near, if it was a combined cycle plant running at baseload, meaning it's probably running at a capacity factor, so let's say 80% or more, The EPA power plant rule is going to essentially make it virtually impossible to build those types of plants.
Yes.
And we're going to desperately need them.
Thank you. The EPA, since you brought it up, its most recent power plant regulations create mandates that all but ensure coal-fired power plants will shut down before 2032. Excuse me, it makes it virtually impossible to get new natural gas plants built and connected to the grid. At the same time, the EPA is actively pursuing a separate effort to further regulate our existing fleet of natural gas-fired power plants. We were already worried about the long-term reliability of the electric grid before the EPA's Clean Power Plan 2.0 on existing coal and new natural gas plants was finalized. As the federal regulator charged with electrical grid reliability, can you discuss what FERC's existing natural gas generation is being developed by the EPA? Commissioner C. and Commissioner Christie.
I think that relates to your first question. I think that these are serious concerns, and taking seriously the consequences that regulations have on critical sources of generation matters. I applaud FERC's efforts last year for the technical conference to give a particularly important insight to EPA in developing that rule. I think it is important for FERC, as you say, as the agency charged with reliability, to be raising these concerns and voicing this important perspective as other agencies go about their work.
Thank you. Commissioner Christie.
Well, again, the EPA power plant rule is going to make it virtually impossible to build new combined cycle gas that runs the space load. So, but yet that is exactly what we're going to have, because the same rule is going to force the retirement of virtually the rest of the entire coal fleet. So, if again, you look at what PJM was doing last week to keep the lights on, 20% was coal. If you take 20% of the resource mix and just evaporate it, and then you don't allow the construction of new combined cycle gas, which the power plant rule essentially will not, the numbers don't add up. You simply, it's just, you're not going to be able to keep the lights on. I mean, that's just plain arithmetic.
Thank you. Can you briefly discuss what the impact would be on the reliability of the EPA? We're to finalize that rule, and I think you've already answered that. The other technology is mandating carbon capture and storage technology that would require plants capture and storage 90% of their emissions within a decade. Feasible, Commissioner C? And
I think there's certainly a lot of promise with that technology. I think one of the concerns that I would have sitting here today is how deployable is that technology right now and on the timeframes of the rule. Again, other agencies have their own statutory lane, but looking from a perspective of reliability and resource adequacy, I would have concerns, especially with those aggressive timeframes.
thank you. Did you want to add anything, Mr. Christie, or?
No, it's not feasible. Every expert in the field and engineers who talk about this say you cannot use, the carbon capture technology is simply not there on the time frame that this rule requires or at a commercial feasibility.
I will address a couple of my other questions to you because I'm out of time, but my colleague from Florida talked about the queue, and I've been working with PJM about this queue issue, so look forward to working with all of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it, gentlemen. I now recognize Mr. Sarbanes from Maryland for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you for your critical work. There's a lot of expertise assembled here, very much appreciated. The work you do throughout the year to assist energy consumers and foster their access to reasonably priced, reliable, secure power is obviously indispensable. I'd like to discuss the situation that led to your recent decision to deny the Maryland Public Service Commission's motion to reopen docket number ER 13-19, which concerns PJM's flawed 2024-2025 capacity auction for a portion of the Delmarva Peninsula. You're probably not surprised that I'm bringing this up. As many of you are aware, when this auction took place in 2022, a mistake in the parameters PJM set resulted in highly inflated capacity prices of more than 4 times the just and reasonable rate, with no commensurate electric reliability benefit to the consumers. Recognizing the mistake, PJM petitioned the Commission to amend the auction, a request that the Commission granted, finding that the initial rates were, quote, unjust and unreasonable. However, in subsequent litigation, the Third Circuit held that PJM's amendments to the rate auction were in violation of the filed rate doctrine, and so PJM petitioned and was granted permission by FERC, thank you, to return to the initial flawed rates. From our witnesses today, only Chair Phillips and Commissioner Christie were on the commission in May when this decision was made, but in your concurring statements, you each expressed that while you believe the court's ruling to be binding, the outcome of reapplying a knowingly flawed market design will be inequitable, unjust, and unreasonably result in unreasonably high prices for ratepayers, including some in my state of Maryland. Mr. Chairman, by the way, without objection, I'd like to enter into the record a letter from bipartisan members of the Maryland delegation to the commission requesting a rehearing of this decision based on the acknowledgement that the outcome is unreasonable and inequitable. And, you know, this letter has come and gone, and I understand where things have landed, and that for declining the request, believes the court's decision binds you in this case. I get that. So given that, my question for you, Chair Phillips, and then we'd love to hear from Commissioner Christie as well, is pretty simple. What do we need to change to ensure that an unacceptable situation like this never occurs again? Even as I can't believe that we have to live with the decision that I just discussed, but looking forward, like, how do we stop this kind of thing from happening?
First of all, I want to agree with you, Mr. Sarbanes. It is absolutely unacceptable. There was an error, and it was an uncontroverted fact that it was an error. And the court came back and said, well, the equities don't matter. Sir, I'll tell you this. For me, the equities always matter. I believe the most important function of our commission is to protect consumers, and that's what we tried to do in this order. Now, court came back and said, we have to do it differently. We will abide by the court's ruling. But we are encouraging PJM and other markets to correct their tariffs, to allow time to fix these errors so that this never happens again.
Congressman, at the time those results came in, I think my comment was, in no universe would these results be considered just and reasonable. I still think that, but the appellate court told us we had to accept them. As to your other question about what do you do about this, I think I've been very vocal about this, I think there are a lot of flaws in the PJM capacity market that really date back many, many years to my time as a state regulator. I think they're working on trying to fix this, this construct known as the capacity market. Maryland, made a choice to divest, to quote unquote deregulate, which sort of exposed your consumers more than in Virginia, where we didn't do it, to the vagaries of the PJM capacity market. That's sort of a global way to respond. But I think there's going to have to be constant effort to try to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and that the PJM capacity market, if that's going to be the resource adequacy construct for states like Maryland, that these results don't happen again.
Thank you. I do want to just mention before my time expires another instance of FERC's responsibility to protect ratepayers, and thank you for the June rejection of Talon Energy's petition to charge ratepayers hundreds of millions of dollars for a costly reliability must-run contract at the Brandon Shores Power Plant in Anne Arundel County. I applaud you for preventing the imposition of such significant costs on energy customers in the Baltimore region. So, some good things and some challenging things to discuss. Thank you all very much, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now go to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Dr. Joyce, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan and your ranking member DeGette, for allowing me to wave on today. And thank you for the commissioners for appearing. Mr. Chairman, first I would ask unanimous consent to submit for the record former Chairman Barton's affidavit on the RTO adder for utilities. Thank you. The electric industry is going through a significant transition as intermittent resources are being added to the grid. It is critical to continue transmission investment and investor-owned utilities that are and will continue to play a large part in this effort. FERC is considering certain policy changes that would sunset the RTO adder for utilities. I'm concerned that this action will add uncertainty to the market and would harm the ability for these companies to invest in improving the grid. Mr. Chairman, I would also ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a paper by Michael Kormos, the former COO of PJM Utilities.
With that objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
As data centers and AI expand across America and in my home state of Pennsylvania, they are providing economic growth and family-sustaining jobs. They also use, as we all know, large amounts of energy, adding significant demand to the grid for the first time in decades. This is all happening at a time when supply to the grid of baseload power is being threatened by draconian rules propagated by President Biden's EPA. Closing coal power plants and restricting new natural gas power plants will stifle the capacity of the grid. Given this environment, we need to look at ways to ease the strain on the grid. One potential solution, as detailed in Mr. Kormos's paper, could be using a co-located behind-the-meter configuration with nuclear generators. Chair Phillips, the race with China and Russia for AI supremacy is simply one that we in the United States cannot afford to lose. What is FERC doing to ensure that the U.S. can facilitate this load growth either by tapping into the power grid or co-locating at plant sites?
We have a pending matter, Congressman, and I wish I could answer your question. We can't talk about, when you talk about the issue of co-location, as a general matter, this is something that we're going to have to deal with, for sure. What we're doing, though, to address the need regarding data centers, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, all these issues, the best thing that we can do is plan for it in the long term.
Does
That's
that
exactly what we
include
do in the
co-locating and tapping into additional power sources, such as nuclear power?
Again, I really cannot get into the details when it comes to that particular issue, which is pending before us. We may get challenged and say that we're prejudging the issue and won't be able to actually sit for that particular proceeding. So I can't go any further than the general matter that I talked about.
Moving on then, in September of 2023, this committee heard from representatives of the nation's major grid operators, including PJM, which manages the grid in Pennsylvania. PJM warned about an expected shortfall in power generation by the end of the decade, due largely to what they classify as policy-driven retirements of reliable fossil fuel plants. In response to one of my questions, all the grid operators agreed that continuing to use fossil fuel plants, especially natural gas, is crucial for maintaining grid reliability. The head of New England ISO described it as, quote, the only practical solution. Since then, the outlook has only worsened with the EPA's introduction of the problematic Clean Power Plan 2.0. Mr. Christie, given these concerns from PJM and other grid operators, what actions can FERC take now within its current authority to address this resource adequacy issue? And further, what additional powers or authorities would you like to see Congress grant to better address the anticipated shortage of dispatchable generation in PJM and in other regions?
PJM is losing dispatchable. As you mentioned, we've talked about this a lot today. PJM is losing dispatchable resources at a rate that's simply not sustainable, and they're not going to be able to keep the lights on if they continue to lose them, and it's primarily coal and gas that they're losing. FERC's role in reliability, first and foremost, we're the regulator of NERC, which sets reliability standards, and that includes effectively raising the alarm on resource adequacy shortfalls as part of the reliability assessments that NERC does and that we do. So one big role we have is what we've done today, which is to raise the alarm about what's going on. We don't have the authority to order the construction of a single generating unit in America because it's the states that do that. And of course, in Pennsylvania, where you're from, Pennsylvania is in the PJM market, and you've given up the IRP process. So basically what gets built in Pennsylvania is only going to get built if the investors build generating units based on whether they think they can get enough revenue from the PJM markets, energy, and especially capacity. FERC regulates the capacity market, and this has been an ongoing source of concern about whether that PJM capacity market is procuring sufficient capacity resources and the right type of capacity resources with the attributes, and that's going to be an ongoing issue. That is under FERC's purview to look and see whether that capacity market is in fact working to get the resources they need.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. I do have additional question on FERC's order number 1920, which I will submit for QFRs. I thank again the commissioners for attending, and I thank you for allowing me to wave on today.
Yes, sir. Gentleman yields back. Now go to Mr. Cardenas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan and Ranking Member DeGette for holding this hearing today, and also the Chairman and Commissioners of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for being here today and discussing in full view of the public the answers to our questions. As we know, our lives largely depend on electricity. It keeps the lights on, powers our devices. During the hottest days, it cools our homes, and during the coldest months, it heats them as well. As something so integral to our lives, it's easy to take it for granted. FERC has played a critical role in ensuring that that's the case, that our nation's grid and electricity is secure, reliable, and affordable. That said, the climate crisis and accelerating climate disasters threaten our grid and have already highlighted that our aging power infrastructure needs to be updated. To safeguard our power system long-term and protect communities, we must update our planning processes and our nation's power infrastructure without losing focus on the transition to affordable and reliable, cleaner energy. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act both made unprecedented once-in-a-generation investments that do just that, all while advancing the environmental justice, and FERC will play an essential and unique role in unlocking the truly transformational benefits embedded in both of those laws. Chairman Phillips, last year I spoke to you about the criteria that would have to be satisfied for the Commission to withhold or deny the approval of a project on environmental justice grounds. During our conversation, you said that under NEPA and the Natural Gas Act, environmental impacts include environmental justice communities, and that hypothetically, there could be significant enough impacts to communities to consider withholding or denying approval of certain projects. Just a few weeks ago, however, FERC approved CP2 LNG despite objections from former Commissioner Clements. In her dissent, former Commissioner Clements expressed that FERC failed to, and I quote, meaningfully assess the project's enormous greenhouse gas emissions and adequately consider how the full range of adverse project impacts will affect environmental justice communities, end quote. With all of that in mind, can you talk about how FERC is making sure that its rules are legally durable, environmentally sound, and meeting the obligations set forth in NEPA and the NGA?
Thank you so much for the question. Under Section 3 and Section 7 of the Natural Gas Act, FERC is required to consider environmental impacts on the communities, the environmental justice communities that you talked about. I'm extremely proud of our record, this commission's record, when it comes to environmental justice. I made it a priority. We had the first ever roundtable. We have established a working group within our Office of General Counsel. We appointed a new senior counsel on environmental justice. We had commission-wide training on environmental justice and equity. We also are looking to issue forward-facing public guidance regarding environmental justice. When it comes to making these decisions, though, it is a delicate balancing act. And we have over 100 conditions on almost any project that we approve under the NGA. And some of those conditions include environmental justice conditions. And we have sua sponte taken action on our own as a commission to protect environmental justice communities. No commission in the history of FERC has done more for EJ than this commission.
Thank you. FERC established the Office of Public Participation over 3 years ago. We've heard, however, that frontline communities impacted by FERC's decisions often have trouble participating in FERC processes given lack of capacity and resources. Congress was explicit in Section 319 of the Federal Powers Act, and that one of the duties for OPP is that it may, quote, provide compensation for reasonable attorney's fees, expert witness fees, and other costs of intervening or participating in any proceeding before the commission to any person whose intervention or participation substantially contributed to the approval, in whole or in part, of a position advocated by such person, end quote. Chairman Phillips, can you comment on the status of the rulemaking or other efforts to provide such intervener compensation to qualifying public interest interveners?
Well, first of all, let me just say how pleased I am with our Office of Public Participation. We're now into the second year of that office. We have a new confirmed office director who's doing an outstanding job. And I want to point everybody to our website in particular. They have explainers that are on our website, which are just outstanding. When I read those explainers, I learn with regard to intervenor funding, this is something that we have three new commissioners I'd like to speak with my colleagues on. To the extent we move forward with that, I would like to do it in a bipartisan manner as best we can.
Thank you. Rosner, C, and Chang, congratulations on your recent confirmation in the Senate. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll go to Ms. Lesko from Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. You know, I'm from Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, so we have a huge expansion of demand for electricity in the metropolitan area. We have the new TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, is being built in my congressional district in North Phoenix. We have data centers, and so, you know, I just want to make sure that we have enough electricity on the grid, and so I appreciate your work and on that. To that end, what new authorities does FERC need to make sure that the right type of new baseload power generation is built? Because I want to make sure that it's good baseload energy for the data centers and semiconductor plants, and we need to make sure we have enough baseload. Would anybody like to take that? Either Chair Williams or Commissioner Christie.
I will certainly address that issue. You know,
Okay.
I agree with you 100%. We need to make sure that we have the power the energy to power our American economy that is available. We know that we need resources that can provide that baseload power. When it comes to FERC, we're resource neutral. I mean, we don't make any particular decisions that favors any one kind of resource. But I can tell you this, I'm an all of the above person. I believe we need to have all the tools on the table when it comes to the resource adequacy for our nation.
Well, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
I would just add, Congressman, that the decision on what generating units to build and what types of generating units is going to be made by your Arizona Utility Commission. That's going to be their decision. And I know a lot of them, and I think they're very aware of this issue, and they're going to do what they think is best for the consumers of Arizona. But that's going to be their decision, what to build and what type to build, because that's how it works in the United States.
Yeah, the thing is that because of some of the mandates from either the Biden administration or local regulators, there's mandates on using solar or wind or whatever it may be, then you know, they're sometimes incentivized to use those, and that might not always be the best solution. So I have another question, and this is for Commissioner Christie as well. What policy changes are being made at FERC in light of the Loper ruling?
In light of the what?
Loper, L-O-P-E-R ruling.
Oh, you're talking about the Chevron. I think the effect will be over time as we have cases that get appealed. And I can't speak to a future case because, you know, it'll have to be argued at the time. But I think that as long as FERC is within its statutory authority, I don't think the Loper case will have any effect at all. I think it will only come when FERC is out on the edge, pushing the envelope, and then I think it'll have an effect. But I think as long as FERC, or any agency for that matter, is in their lane, I don't see Loper having a big effect.
Okay. And Commissioner Christie, how is FERC coordinating with the EPA to address the premature retirements of fossil generators that are creating significant reliability issues in the United States, if they are?
We're not, because they went ahead with their rule and they put it out there, and now we and other utility regulators are going to deal with the consequences, which are going to be pretty negative to reliability.
You know, Mr. Chair, I'm going to yield, and so these fine folks can get on with their day's work, and we can go on to our hearing that we have, the joint hearing on the floor. Thank you, and I yield back.
Joan yields back. It looks like we have expired all the members.
I mean, under the wire, under the wire.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And
Gentleman from Texas.
I'm sorry. I thought when you gave me the nod there.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I want to thank the panel for being here today. I think that this is a very well-timed committee hearing that we're having on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and some of the challenges that the United States is facing now and in the future when it comes to load growth. On load growth, it seems like in DFW, there is a announcement that we have, like almost daily, it feels like now, on data centers that are groundbreaking in the area. There has been some back and forth today, but multiple things can be true at once. Load growth is not the end of the world, and yes, the rate of demand increase is expected to be higher due to AI and data centers, but this country has seen periods of load growth before, and there's no denying that we're currently unprepared for load growth and need to mobilize. ERCOT alone expects an additional 40,000 megawatts of load growth by 2030. And AI will continue to gain efficiency as well. And since 2008, demand has been up just 1.4%. But that's an increase, that's a total increase over 16 years and not the average gain. And AI is not the only source of load growth, of course. Thanks to the IRA and CHIPS, we're seeing industrial load growth in the form of hydrogen hubs, direct air capture of carbon dioxide and semiconductor manufacturing plants. And fortunately, we can still do some things in this country. I think a great example of this is ERCOT's Connect and Manage process for bringing a new generation of sources online. In contrast to other RTOs and ISOs, invest and manage processes. ERCOT allows resources to connect to the grid in an expeditious way and addresses any immediate transmission bottlenecks through generation redispatch and curtailment, and manages grid upgrades through a centralized evaluation process. And ERCOT is far from perfect, but by linking a more rapid and realistic interconnection process with a more proactive, holistic transmission planning process, we think that we can create a grid of the future in a way that quickly and cost-effectively connects new clean resources and enables economy-wide decarbonizations and, of course, keeps the lights on, which brings me to the comment that Chairman Phillips had made, and recognizing that this extraordinary growth needs to be funded fairly, so the cost of connecting these data centers to the grid won't be shifted to consumers. There are several interesting concepts that are being looked at, and one is co-locating these facilities at existing nuclear plants where the facility owner carries the burden of cost rather than transmission users. And I know that this has been a topic of conversation today, and I'd just like to add my voice to those that are watching the issue. And also to Chairman Phillips, we heard testimony last month that AI data centers could bring economic development to historically and disadvantaged rural communities. But the testimony also indicated that Congress should act to ensure access to opportunities created by these increasing loads. Chairman, you've championed environmental justice issues during your time at FERC, and I was hoping that you could give us your thoughts on how Congress can ensure that access.
Thank you so much. You know, I'm glad that you came, and thank you for your leadership, Mr. Beasy, because it is important that we know the load that we're talking about, it is for America, and it will provide jobs, and it will power the future of our economy. And it's not just about data centers, although I did read a report recently that we add a new data center like every 3 days. And for many of these communities, this is a good thing. One other thing I want to say, when we talk about what we're really planning for here, I'm not an expert on quantum computing, but we know that there's a lab in the United States that's leading that research for the world. It has to maintain a temperature of negative 460 degrees. They call it the coldest place in the universe. That requires a lot of power. We have to plan for it, and we can, and we will. With order number 1920, we're gonna get this done. I'm looking forward to the future.
Good, good. I wanted to ask Commissioners Rosner and Chang, I want to switch gears to the gas side a little bit, and we've seen how the U.S. has become a significant player in as a natural gas producer, and I know that FERC is going to play a critical role when it comes to the permitting process. How are each of you evaluating the positive impacts on local communities and benefits to consumers of natural gas infrastructure projects while factoring in GHG emissions and some of the other environmental issues?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I would say this. Timely infrastructure approvals are a priority for me, and it's something that I'll work towards. My approach will be this. It'll be, first and foremost, follow the statute. We've got pretty clear definition on what that statute means from the Supreme Court, which has said that the purpose of the statute, the relevant statute here, is Natural Gas Act, and that's to encourage the orderly development of plentiful supply of natural gas at reasonable price. Courts have also told the Commission that they have to consider certain impacts. My approach will be to follow the statute and follow the court precedent in making decisions, also looking at the record and listening to the views of all parties. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Certainly, natural gas plays an important role in our energy resource mix, and like Commissioner Rosner, I will also take into consideration of all the facts of cases that come before me, and certainly consider court cases and statute when considering each case that comes before me.
Yeah.
So
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your patience.
Gentleman yields back, and I'll let him go a little longer because the new commissioners actually got some questions there at the end. So I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. It looks like we're finished with all the member questions. Members may have additional written questions for you all. Remind members they have 10 business days to submit the additional questions for the record, and ask the witnesses to do their best to submit responses within 10 business days upon receipt of the questions. Ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the documents included on the staff hearing documents list. Without objection, that'll be the order. And let me just welcome the new commissioners to FERC. We wish you the best from this subcommittee and the full committee in your efforts, in your duties there at FERC. Chairman Phillips and Commissioner Christie, again, welcome back, and thank you for being here today. We appreciate the work you guys do because it's vitally important to energy security, reliability, affordability for our nation. So thanks for being here, and with that, we'll stand adjourned.